I am here for Counterpoints episode 31 with Moses. And you know what, Moses? This podcast, like all of my content now, is sponsored by Boomeo. And the thing about Boomeo is they've got a very varied roster of guys on there, right? They've got, for example, like Shocks, in my opinion, one of the best players ever, very exciting player, very talented as well. They've got people like, you got Nothing on there, obviously, like veteran player, still always got his head in the game somehow, like he has his tough times, but his teams keep rising back to the top. And then they've got, this is what reminded me of you, my work I do with you. So they've also got a Dren. So they've got like kind of like a really washed up old school player that people respect, and we love him for his brain, but he will never again play at the top level. Again, I'm talking about a Dren there, not Moses here, but I'm also talking about Moses really. So now that we've done the Boomeo commercial, because by the way, in my world, that's a commercial. Like, I'm going to get paid for what I just did there, everyone. Like, I actually slammed someone else who worked at the site? It's all jokes, isn't it? So that's the life we live in.
Classic
all still mates.
Classic banter.
All still Boomeo mates. And when the check clears, the Adren and Thorin love story of Boomeo. So
it's funny that every Boomeo intro you do has some kind of a burn on Adren in some way.
Has a burn on someone. I had one on Nothing. I had one where I put it in on him, Like I had one where I explained that, he's been in Cloud9 for 4 years, it's like at the core of it, so he must be good at talking and explaining stuff. So obviously he's good in them videos he does. So see what I mean? It's all about being genuine, Moses. A genuine asshole, obviously. So okay, with that, and there we go, the genuine asshole, that's me. So let's get the show on the road. So we're going to start with some news first on this one, because obviously we're going to talk about StarLadder. It's coming up in a few days. I'll be heading out there tomorrow, but we'll put that towards the end, since that's like the predictions, the stuff that, in theory, I realise fans don't realise this, but when you're talking about predictions, you can't actually know what's going to happen. So you have to sort of speculate. There's a lot of guesswork involved. Now, I realise I'm just so charismatic. I trick people into thinking I do know what's going to happen. But actually, some of these are guesses. And you know what, Moses? This is going to shock you. Sometimes I'm just making shit up, because my job is to say stuff.
Yeah, I entirely believe the fact that you just make shit up. It works out nicely, doesn't it?
Sometimes I even make up stuff that happened in the past about the other people. And the genius concept I figured out is, if you do that in a really specific manner, there's not really enough time in a broadcast for them to like actually argue the points. They have to just let it go,
And if you are vetted as the esports historian, you
exactly.
actually change history.
No, that's my entire approach. I'm just taking like a one-man 1984 type approach to rewriting history. Like the secret is, the secret that people don't realise is players who like fuck with me now, they don't realise, now you could set the record straight, but in like 5 years, I can just write your career however I decide it was written. So at that point, the 12-year-old kid joining is like, oh, so actually, Adren never got any kills at all. And I'm like, yes, that is exactly right. So
he's going to love that.
So, okay. Now, he did get some kills. For a start off, I'd imagine his assists were pretty high. Right, let's get into the episode. So here's an interesting one. Speaking of questionable teams, we're going to go with Renegades, right? Now, Renegades is an interesting team because obviously the weird thing about them is they've... This will sound strange, okay? This is how I always characterize Renegades. Because they play in NA, and because online CS in NA is like... it's like in Europe. Obviously, there's a lot of parity, but that means that as a result, it's not like just the two teams at the top are miles ahead of everyone, Renegades have the terrible position of always being good enough to be relevant, but then not actually being good enough to do anything when they get to the offline competition, So as a result, we have to talk about them. We're always interested in how they're going to do. And if they just died off completely and they were just obscure and they never, let's say they got relegated from Pro League and they didn't make it through any qualifiers, then we could stop talking about them. But because they do qualify for events and they do at least qualify for EPL and stuff, they are just about relevant. But they're always a question mark because people always looked at them and they never did do anything at these offline finals. So one of the things I'll give them credit for immediately is they have been making roster moves recently. And finally, they have broken that threshold, Moses. The dam has opened and they are taking in international players. So this is the first piece of news. Renegades has acquired Nifty from Selfless Gaming. Yeah. So Nifty, listen, he's been to a few lands. It's not like he's a totally fresh guy. I will say, coming from Selfless, Renegades is a perfect step up there because they're also a team who did all right online and then would qualify for a LAN and then not do anything at the LAN. So you know more than me about the NA scene. What do you think of Nifty as a player? What do you think of him joining Renegades?
I actually, I mean, it's one of those crazy things where I actually don't get to see a whole lot of him these days, just because I'm over in Europe. Honestly, I don't really think too much of him. He's a player. The issue with him is that he's been a player that's been like hyped and excited. Like people have been excited about seeing where he goes, and because of that, I think you kind of form a little bit of unrealistic expectations of where he's at and where he can go. I haven't seen anything to think he's some kind of like star player, but he's always built that way, right? He's always built as this like crazy young talent who's going to become a star. And I haven't quite seen it from his performances online. Sure, maybe online, and that's always the first step. But I mean, I'm honest to God, this pickup does not really impress me all that much onto this team. I don't think it solves a lot of issues. I don't think it fills any gaps. I think they're really struggling now in the sense that they lost Ricky. I think that's hurting them more than they could have ever imagined it would, especially losing an Opper, losing both your Oppers. Now that Yam's gone as well, he's also the in-game leader. So it's tough to say this is going to be a net positive just because not only have you lost two long-standing players, but you've lost such crucial roles, like both Oppers and an in-game leader within two players. Like it's all gone. So now all of a sudden you have so many other gaps to fill that someone like Nifty just like isn't even going to scratch the surface of solving your problems. Even if they like brought in like a Nico, like that still would be like, okay, great, you have this sick player, but you still have a lot of gaps missing, right? So
yeah,
they're in a. I tweeted out a couple, I think last week, that this team was like falling apart at the seams, and at the moment from the outside looking in, it seems actually worse than I initially even thought it was. Like this is scary for this team. They're at a big turning point.
Yeah, the thing is, like Nifty, listen, I don't watch online American CS, so I can go ahead and say that in general. Like I watched the odd qualifier, you know, when it got deep to like the last four, just because I wanted to see who was going to qualify for the LAN. But that's about it. So I have to say, from what I saw, I didn't see a lot that was positive because the odd time I did see him online. First of all, it's not like he's one of these people who's a pure onliner. Like they just dominate everyone online and then they get to land their shit. Actually, this is going to sound bad, but he's not even that good. Like actually, he looked more like a streaky player, and he's the one where if they like have a crazy round, people are like, wow, he's so nutty. Oh, this guy, he's got so much potential. But then I have to say, the few lands I've seen him at, because I was actually at a land that he did, which was Sevo Season 9, where he was out in the group.
I think he was at E-League Season 1 as well, weren't they?
I think you could be right, probably. Yeah. And the problem is, I have to say, every time I saw him on LAN, he was significantly worse. Now, at the time, the banter was maybe he is a cheater, because that's always the concern whenever anyone does like ridiculous shit online and nothing on LAN. Yeah. Now, I would assume, better by how he's played now, he's just not that good a player. And there's like either the mental block, which is like a standard thing that happens to a lot of players, or maybe his game just doesn't translate offline. So I am interested in as much as this is a much better team than he's ever played in. Like if you look at the players on this team, I think there's a lot more potential here. But I agree. I mean, I don't really see how this is like... The part that I don't understand is how is this a great move for Renegades? You know, that's the part that doesn't make a lot of sense in the equation.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why he was so hyped, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, but I could be wrong. I think he's like the guy who was a pro in COD. I think he's the one who came over from Call of Duty. I know he's got like a picture with Hastro from like 5 years ago or something going to a COD event. But I'm pretty sure that's him.
He was.
I think that's a little bit of the excitement behind him is that like, oh, this guy was a COD pro. Like, let's see what can do. And obviously, it's nothing impressive. He's still young, 19 years old, and he hasn't played with any kind of great. Well, coming from Selfless as well. Not only your teammates not exactly like the most skilled, but Selfless, and this isn't a bad thing. Selfless is the org that picks up players with that are young that show promise and then flips them, right?
It's a farm team, right?
Yeah. So I mean, listen, fair play to Ryu. It's working so far because he's actually flipped a lot of players off that team. He's making that work. But Nifty just strikes me as that kind of a player who hasn't really also had a great chance to show off if he can become anything, just because his teammates have never been that good. So your decision making, you always have to like try and go above and beyond in certain situations. Your decision making is off because your team just can't do certain things at this level of competition. So it'll be interesting to see what he can bring when he's around people like JKS and Azza that can hold their own on an individual skill level, even if they're not. By the way, Renegades as a whole, part of the reason, like, they're never going to do anything great if Azza doesn't step up his game. It's been so long since we've seen him play good over a period of time. So I mean, they have more issues than just the fact that they're basically missing two players. And the fifth player for this team coming in, I believe that's Nexa. He's the Serbian player. They're waiting for his visa to clear. And he's 19 years old, and he's never played a match like at a professional level. And he's supposed to come in and be the in-game leader. So there's a lot of interesting things going on with this team that like prevent either of these pickups to be that exciting beyond like just general curiosity and what they're going to become.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I do think it's a positive that they're picking up NA players now because in theory, in the future, that gives them some more options, you know? You don't just have to source from the Australian or New Zealand scene or whatever you were doing before. But the big issue is, first of all, I mean, they still haven't solved the in-game leader issue. That's a massive problem in their team. Yeah. Like, they're a perfect example of a team to me where it's not just even talking about you don't have a good in-game leader. To me, they had no in-game leader. They were having people just try the role out. And when you don't have any in-game leader, unless all your players, like, the reason why Fnatic is very rare that they could make it work without a proper in-game leader is because they're all just not only such skilled players, but they're also players who kind of knew how to play with each other. And that second part, like that's worth its weight in gold. You know, you don't just get that when you're a lower level player. And so, unfortunately, if you don't have a proper in-game leader, you can look worse as the star player than anyone else. Like you can look really bad because sometimes this is a concept that like a lot of star players don't always understand, which is that sometimes you can be a very talented player, but not know how you actually should be best used. And therefore, you'll put yourself in bad situations where you get with a guy, I mean, look at how Carrigan turned FaZe around. You get with a guy who does know how to evaluate your skills properly, you know, reasonably, not like your own ego, and then tell you, no, listen, you go here and it's going to work. And you know what, when you go here, this other player is going to back you up or he's going to divert for you. Suddenly, you see the whole game open up. You start to see, wow, he's making the game easier for me now. And now I can really shine.
Yeah, and also, I mean, those in-game leaders also put into context, like, when you're supposed to make the play, right? They're star players because they can do things individually that, like, lesser players, it needs to be, like, two of them, right? So the fact that, you know, as a star player, if you're expected to make this on your own, if it goes wrong or if you do it at the wrong time or in the wrong situation, then it just looks silly. Then you just die for no reason. So having an in-game leader to kind of put it into context in the framework of an overall team goal is pretty necessary. I think it's kind of interesting. I mean, I'm over here in Cologne doing Pro League with Sponge, and it's always fun listening to his thoughts of Renegades. And I think at a certain degree, I think he's just at the point where he wants to see these guys. And I think there's a lot of truth to this as well. He thinks that that core, those three guys, like Alza and JKS especially, if they were to like leave Renegades, there's a lot of teams that could use players with those skill sets in North America. So instead of bringing in North American players, he like see them like branch off into North American teams.
Yeah. No, I mean I did a video on this topic. I know he basically agrees completely. Yeah. Like the whole point is this is kind of the context that we've been discussing this move in, is that it's not even just that they're not making the right move. It's like, what right move can they make? Really, they need a good in-game leader. They probably need more American players as well, but they're expensive to get at the moment, as even people like Cloud9 will tell you. So the big problem they have right now is, how do you make this lineup better? I don't really have answers for them, you know. So I have to say, I kind of agree with Sponge. The difference is, obviously, the org can't think this way, but if I'm Azza and JKS, I can assure you guys, if you guys go to good teams, you could have a much better career, you know. Like, if you can get over the fact that you're not going to be with Australian people and you're just going to live in an American team house or something, people like JKS and Azza put on the right team definitely could be very successful players.
I think right now the entire game plan for Renegades is just pray that this Nexa guy becomes like some kind of like a fusion of Yanko's brain with like Nico's skill set, and they just like hope and pray that he can become this unbelievable player that would have never gotten the opportunity. So he's coming over for his big chance, and he spends like the next year just becoming this like a second star player from that region, and that's a long shot. This almost reminds me of like this, like Cloud9 picking up Stewie. Not to say it's going to work, but like at the time, that's a big risk. That's someone who's like never played at this level, and just like hope and pray that he develops into some kind of like fucking star player, and then from there he also has to develop as an in-game leader. So I mean, this is a long shot in my opinion. And I feel like I said this last time, but I feel like this actually does have to be the last time this core of Australian players actually tries to make this work. Like, how much longer can you actually spend doing this and not having the results? Especially when, like you said, these players can find careers elsewhere that show more promise in the future.
Well, especially because, like I say, It's just that, unfortunately, like this would have taken care of itself if they'd have just bombed online, and if the team just didn't work in any way. Eventually, you're not going to have an org anymore. Eventually, you're going to get offers and you're going to take them. Their problem is that they were stuck in the purgatory of being just good enough every time with the online games to qualify for LANs. So I actually feel like that's probably what's going to happen here, because they've replaced enough of the team that I think either they just flame out and it naturally disbands, or maybe they get it together and they actually become a decent team now. The interesting thing for me, though, is what actually happens. Like, I know Ricky already obviously went and joined CLG, right? Wasn't it?
Yeah, Ricky's in CLG.
Yeah. So do we actually know what... Like, Yam just stepped down as far as I remember. So is he just done completely? Let me double check this, actually.
I think he's going to go back and play with an Australian team, like back
Yeah,
home.
that's right.
Yeah, I know. As far as I know from behind the scenes and from what I've kind of heard, Ricky was cut and went there, and that was like personality issues based. And then I think Yam was like kind of like the same kind of situation, but I think they just worded it different. I could be wrong on Yam.
Yeah.
Like Yam might have just gone back home. I'm not sure. Maybe he was just bored of no success. But I mean, here's the real issue. This team, the only reason they're qualifying for things is because they're playing in the NA region. Like this isn't a tier 2 team if they're in Europe. In fact, I don't even think, looking at the teams that are outside of SK, like play in Immortals, I guess, outside of it, like 2 Brazilian teams, I'm not even sure Cloud9, Team Liquid, or Optic would even be like that consistently beating tier 2 teams over in Europe.
No, I mean, here's the thing. It's a bit like when we discuss later on for Starlad, and we're going to have to discuss CLG, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. CLG and Renegades have both benefited from being in NA, just because what happens there essentially is you have these huge online qualifiers. And here's the thing. Even if Team Liquid doesn't qualify, like, for example, they didn't at some of these ones, it's gonna come down to the same 5 or 6 teams at the end of the qualifier. Always happens. And then all that you're really hoping for if you're Renegades at that point is you just have to win that one big best of 3. Yeah. If you do it, like CLG did for this one, you get to go to the big LAN. And for your org, they go, great job, guys. You get the exposure. You get to go to the start. But the problem is, like you're saying here, you have to be realistic. Yeah, you qualified because there was a certain number of NA spots. And that, by the way, the fucking organizer of the tournament was desperately hoping Team Liquid qualified for that fucking spot, not CLG. But okay, so you qualified. Congrats, but you are going to get banged at the LAN. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you have to actually have higher aspirations than that, because... yeah, as we're kind of saying here, it's inflated, you know. Same as, for example, they're qualifying for all these major qualifiers because they just go and play the minor every time. And what's funny is they don't even win the minor. They come second. But top 2 in an Asian minor, which has got to be fucking, aside from the CIS minor, now that there's no good teams left in there, it's got to be the easiest fucking minor in the world. So you can't take pride in this, is my point. You know, if you've really got some good players and you've got solid experience under your belt, it's got to be going for something higher than this. You can't stay in this spot. It's not a good spot.
Well, what's funny is, like, they're also stuck in like this weird situation at the moment because they're playing with Adder, who they've already announced is not going to be on the team moving forward, and they're playing with Uber, who's formerly from Selfless and Complexity. So now they bring in Nifty. I'm assuming he's going to start playing for one of them, and the other one is they're just waiting on Nexus. So they're actually playing with 2 people for the past month or so that's not going to be on the roster moving forward. So they're not gaining anything. They're going to have to restart this whole cycle. We make this sound like all doom and gloom. Renegades has gone 9-1 in their last 10 games in Pro League, which is nice online. It's nice to see them play themselves back in actual contention for a playoff spot. But then again, here comes the depressing hammer. Like, just fucking the Asian minor is scheduled the same weekend as Pro League finals. So much like last season, if they qualify, they just don't get to go to Pro League. They have to go to the Asian minor, which, like you said, should be a qualification for them. But that's also been true the last 2 times they've gone and failed to qualify. So it's pretty weird situation.
Are you ready, Moses? Because
I'm ready.
This is a concept that's going to blow your mind. So here's something no one has thought to do yet, but actually isn't that bad an idea when you think about it. Okay.
Shit.
So if we're talking about how Renegades should recruit NA players and vice versa, like the NA scene should absolutely, if they can, look at like Azure, JKS, because again, if all the other big talent is already signed up by the top 3 or 4 orgs, then the buyouts are ridiculous. So you need people that are like either good enough to warrant the buyouts, they have to have experience in that case, or they've got to be people who are available when the contract ends. So the other one that actually I'm surprised no one has done yet is, why has no one tried to look for like one good Brazilian player who isn't on Immortals and SK? Like, one good player. There's got to be at least one or more out there. And here's the thing. I realize, they're going to want to speak Portuguese. They want to stay in Brazil. But the point I'm making is, once you get past Immortals and SK, you're dropping down so much in terms of salary and opportunity that I think that if you gave one of these guys a decent offer, one of them would take it at least.
You mean, are you talking like about one of the guys from Luminosity even?
Not specific. I mean, listen, if you could get them, but I'm just means I'm thinking with what a big scene they've got.
Yeah.
Come on, there's got to be one person that's worth taking a chance on, you know?
Well, especially if you go to someone like Fallen. We know how much he supports the Brazilian team. If you go to him and say, hey, I know you're living over in NA, but like, is there anyone back home in Brazil that you've seen or that you've heard of that shows some promise that we could scout? Or maybe fly him out here for a week to try out. Yeah. I'm sure he'd have a name for him. That'd be interesting. That would actually... it's another situation, though. I mean, I mentioned, I think in the last episode or the one before that, this was what teams were going to have to start having to do is go abroad to like young, untested players and just pick up skill and have to develop them. So, I mean, coaches for teams is going to start becoming very, very important. But, yeah, why not? The issue is you imagine... There has got to be one more, but it is kind of insane to think that Luminosity as a team is like actually competitive in the North. Like, how are the 3 Brazilian teams beating up on all the North American teams?
No, that is sad, because the difference is, right, the SK one, first of all, that's a once in a generation thing. That's a fantastic team of players. The Immortals one, a very different team, but okay, that's like the rest of the talent, you know. It's the idea that the third one has any chance. At that point, all the players should be gone. There should be no talent left there. And yet, yeah, they're not terrible. That's the ridiculous part, isn't it?
Yeah.
They still do get deep down in these qualifiers.
It's crazy to me that, like, because I can't see, like, if you look at this roster, I mean, obviously it's just because it's the third best team, there are going to be players that we don't really like know of. But I mean, it's crazy to me to think that this lineup on Luminosity is more skilled than some of these North American teams with some of the names that they have. So I mean, it's insane. I mean, I feel like this is just another instance in where Brazilian Counter-Strike is just showing North America that it's not all about skill, that you have to have some of that intrinsic, like, you have to have that teamwork, some of that discipline. Because when I watch Luminosity, I don't see the massive skill levels, but I do see smart plays. Much like the other Brazilian teams, they play post plants very well. They play the mid games very patiently. They don't get ahead of themselves. So I mean, it's the small things that they're doing that the North American teams aren't being able to compete with.
Sure. I mean, obviously, the other problem with them is, like, I still think if you gave one of them a really good offer, you know, that one of them would probably take it. But obviously, like, some of them are going to be naive and dream that one day, you know, they'll go from Luminosity to SK. I realise, by the way, when you say that, everyone listening goes, well, that would never happen, you know. No players would ever go from Luminosity to SK because Fallen told us that would never happen. He loves Luminosity. Oh wait, my mistake. I got lost in something there, Moses. Never mind that.
Yeah.
Plus, they were represented by that amazing lawyer who was definitely going to get them out of the contract. And I think did he succeed? Let me just check. Never mind, actually. So anyway, speaking... I'm seamless how I do this. So speaking of people who are washed up NA pros, who we love for their minds, but probably should just move on. Here's an interesting piece of information I did not know, right? Okay. So it was announced that Hazed is going to stand in for Team Liquid at iBuyPower, the iBuyPower Invitational Cup.
Yep.
But here's the part I didn't know, okay? So when I heard that, I thought, okay, it seems fine. You know, he's not playing at the moment. He had actually announced he was going to retire or something. And, you know, maybe they need a player, so he just stands in for them. But here's the part that's crazy, is I actually saw an interview with... Let me think it was FNS from CLG. And in the interview, he happens to mention that...
They were deciding between Hayes and...
So it was one of the newer players. They decided between him and... I can't remember who it was. One of the newer players. And they obviously went with the newer player, you know. And so that makes it sound like Hayes... Yeah, exactly. That makes it sound like Hayes still wants to play. So this is what's really confusing about that. Is if you remember the CLG that basically was in the E-League Last Chance... whatever the fuck that was called, qualifier that we saw them play in, where they played that close series against FaZe. Now, if you remember, that was the CLG, which was supposed to be, like, set to die in all respects. Like, Tarek wanted out. He obviously did get out eventually. Cutler was, like, in really bad form and knew, like, you know, he's just hanging around at that point in time. And famously, Hayes, who was actually in-game leading or something mad, said something like, you know, basically this is it for me. Like, I'm going to retire now. I've even seen, I know he did, like, posts and tweets that were like, yeah, I'm done with CIA. But this makes it sound like he wants to keep playing. This sounds like a weird set of circumstances. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm not entirely... Here's what I think happened, and I haven't talked to Hayes. I haven't talked to actually anyone about CLG. This is all speculation on my part. I know Hayes moved. I know he moved to Texas, and you know, he's doing his thing there, and I think he was planning on that, like, kind of being the end. But then I think
not suicide, his career, obviously.
Yeah, career over.
It wasn't like a leaving Las Vegas this type of scenario.
But I think it was that weird. It was that weird moment. It was that time when like CLG really needed like a player, and they couldn't find out who they were going to pick up. They were being really patient with it. They were looking at a couple different options, and I think technically he was still under contract with them, so he volunteered, or they asked him to like stand in for an event or two while they looked for these players. Just supposed to be a short-term thing. And just knowing myself as a former player, I think that kind of aspect of coming back and practicing and competing for like 2 weeks with like no pressure, I think that just got fun to him again, right? And I think that's where like he started to consider maybe this isn't actually the end. Maybe I actually do want to play. So yeah, I don't know. I guess it would depend on moving forward. I think it's a similar situation with Liquid. I think they're taking their time. They're looking at a couple different options, and they were just like, we need someone. Let's get Hayes. He's harmless. Like, so they pick him up just for the event and see just kind of how they do, and then it'll all kind of go back to normal. It'll just be interesting to see if Hayes searches for another team after all is said and done.
Because the thing about Hayes is, as much as I like, by the way, because I know his personality, like he's someone where obviously I'll jab at them and make out like this shit. Here's the thing: he was never like pure shit. Obviously, he was a very serviceable player. I use that kind of terminology. You know, he was like someone who could play a role, and he's definitely not going to demand any resources. He's going to set up the star players in his team. He knows that's his role, so he can certainly do that in like a top 4, top 5 NA team. I'm certainly could still do it. The problem is he's obviously not like anything like a star player. So for him, like I could see how like he's obviously not going to be on Team Liquid, by the way. It's just a standard scenario. But unfortunately, if he does want to still play, it's still going to be around the level that CLG was at. You know, it's going to be a CLG or a Selfless or maybe Renegades. That's got to be a possibility, right? It's got to be one of those sorts of teams, probably, right?
Yeah. Well, and also, by the way, I mean, personally, I love Hayes as a person. I think he's I'm pretty much in the same boat with you as a player. But I am so fucking glad he did not rejoin CLG, because we've seen this chapter before, right? We've seen this story play out. This Cutler, FNS, Hayes core. Even when they had intense skill like JDM and Tarek, they weren't able to really do anything with it. So I think of those three, if that reunite happens, like I don't think they even do anything.
Like put it this way, think about it. What would be the point in reuniting CLG without the star players?
Right.
That's like, guys, I've reunited the Beatles. Yeah, John Lennon and Paul McCartney couldn't make it. Like, what the fuck? It's like, well, no one wants to watch it then, do they? Like,
no, that would be a fucking nightmare. Yeah, but I will say this, because I thought something pretty similar when FNS rejoined the roster. I was like, here we go again. You know, we're back at it with FNS as the in-game leader. I think much like Daps, I think he's an in-game leader that he's not going to blow your mind away tactically, but I think there's something to him in-game leading where he seems to have like a calming presence. He knows how to play with Cutler. Obviously, Cutler's looked much better on the online games that I've seen of CLG than he has in the past year and a half. Kusta's improving. Ricky's playing well. So, I mean, there's some cool young pieces. Ethan, I think, is he's one of the young talents in the North American scene that I think moving forward is someone to keep your eye on. But, I mean, he's got the young guys heading in the right direction, and then obviously they have the experience, especially with Ricky coming in. They have now, an Alper. I think Kusta's rifling more. Okay. So, I mean, I think this team, they're not going to be anything special international at the moment, but in North America, they're starting to look a little bit dangerous. They're not in the playoff hunt for EPL, but...
Right, Moses.
Yeah.
I've got a theory for you, okay? I'm going to give you some prime, classic, out-of-the-box thinking, okay?
Yeah.
So, at some point in the past, so we won't say when, so that, like, no one can ever nail me down on this, I was really, really high, right? And... as I am wont to do, when I'm really high, right? Yeah, most of the time, I think about the universe. I watch, like, super out there, like, fringe conspiracy, like, documentaries and shit. Just the usual fun stuff, to pretend like that's real and scare yourself for a minute. But for whatever reason, sometimes, my mind will drift to esports and something like I've read on Twitter as I'm, like, scanning it or something. And so what's great is then you get to process through your mind, at that point, a very disjointed kind of a mind that's really, it's in a different realm. And you then process the same information in a very different way.
That kind of high, huh?
And so when I was thinking about some of these players, where it's, the player where they're insane online. So I was thinking, obviously, there's Ethan from CLG here. I mean, in Europe at the moment, there's this guy Ropes, who's this really young guy in FPL. So they're guys who online are insane, and then either, first of all, they don't go to LANs, or they just, they go to their first ones and it's like just okay, they're not as crazy as they were online. What I started thinking in my mind was, right, what if all pro players cheat? What if they're all using hacks, Moses? And this is the genius, okay? Like, obviously, no one could get that good at games. What they're actually doing is everyone in CS is a hacker. And when you're a young player like that, it's like you've perfected your hacks to the level where you can get away with it on online competition, but then you haven't figured out, like, the method to get it offline yet. And so at your first few LANs, you know, it's like sort of misfiring, and every now and then it works, it doesn't work. And some LANs, you see the protection's too good, so you can't run it. And you have to just play off your own skill, and you just average, you know? And what happens is, actually, no one's getting over these nerves. Like, what nerves are we talking about? There's no nerves. So you get to the LAN, and what actually happens in CS is that all players eventually go through a phase where they just get to the level where they've perfected the hacks offline, and then eventually they just become sick offline players. So they become like Stewie 2K. The hacks are just godlike at that point. And not only that, that's why the other players give them props, because since the secret conceit of the scene is that everyone actually hacks, even people like all of my staff to be like, Stewie, you have got fucking sick hacks now. I mean, you are a wicked player now. I really respect what you're doing in the scene. I wish the rest of your teammates would get it together and hack at your level, but they won't. They won't put in the hours reading that C++ book, and they won't work with fucking Microsoft Distributed Network.
I gotta stop you.
It's a pretty good theory, right? It's pretty out there. Don't worry, by the way. As soon as I returned to like sobriety and then the next day I thought this theory, I did then just think, probably pretty implausible theory.
I feel like I just have like a Billy Madison moment. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything. Fucking hell, Duncan.
It was good, wasn't it?
You need to think about something else when you get high.
I know.
No?
Or maybe I should just consume less butter, like Steele, our friend Steele does. Because too much butter, that'll mess you thinking up as well.
That'll really fuck your shit up.
Too much. If the food is too rich with the butter, then it's going to mess you thinking up.
Ooh,
so
I've actually got to tell you something that's going to blow your mind.
Come on.
You were spotted at the train station by a colleague of mine just last weekend.
Train station?
In Amsterdam.
Okay. Well, now you've given away when I was high as shit, obviously. Okay, well done, Moses. That whole fucking statute of limitations is gone. Okay. And did this person say hello to me or something?
No, just spotted you from afar and didn't want to say hi.
Fair enough.
Was a little bit intimidated, I think.
It's a good job they didn't, mate, because at the time I was thinking about how all CS pros probably cheat, and so if anything, by the way, Moses, that interjection into my world, like, hey, I work for ESL or something, like, where are the spies? Are the snipers on the roof right now? No, they've hacked the database. It'd be like fucking Ghost in the Shell or something, right? Anyway, so moving on, I've got some information for you here, which is that over in the Chinese scene, they had the qualifier for IEM Sydney, which is in a while, so it's a while from now. But we all know it's a good event already. There's a couple of big name teams going there. And Vici Gaming actually won the qualifier. But here's what's confusing about it, right? If you look at the Vici Gaming lineup, the only ones you really recognize is there's the Zoking guy still there. Advent had played more towards the end, but all the ones you remember, so like TB, the guy who used to a long time ago be in the Tyloo of 1.6, Savage, obviously legendary player. These guys aren't in the team because they actually split the team into sister teams and they're in the other team. And Tyloo themselves aren't really Tyloo because, okay, if you remember at DreamHack Vegas, they had this guy HZ there because they'd had the whole problem before with Fancy Warn and Carson getting kicked out of the team. Now, they had HC there, but at the time he was just a stand-in and no one knew if he was going to continue on. Now, he is apparently still in the team, but then they've picked up this guy, BNTET, and he's the guy from Singapore who is supposedly, according to Blur, like, you know, some talent over there who people think is going to be really good. And so that's their new lineup. So their lineup no longer has Fancy One. I mean, they haven't had him for a while, but they also don't have Attacker anymore. That's the interesting detail. So the interesting thing about this detail is, okay, it leads into a side story, which is if you wonder where is Fancy One, that's what's interesting is now the talent has actually fractured even more in the Chinese scene because Fancy One, Karsa and Attacker are all in their own team now called Flash Gaming. And essentially them leaving and wanting to find a new place anyway was actually what spurred that whole thing where like they initially removed all the players from Tyloo. And by the way, if you look at the order of what's happened, it makes it clear that even though people like Attacker came back and were like, I did the wrong thing, I am very sorry, like looking like they had a fucking gun off camera, like saying, read the fucking script, motherfucker. Are you going to, or you disappear from the pro scene? Like obviously that's what it looked like. Well, essentially that That, as far as I can tell, all they did there is just try to save face because they have just left anyway. Yeah. They have gone to their own team, and we are in like a new era of Tai Lu. So it just shows how, unfortunately, when you don't have an into the politics of the team, and I mean, there's no fucking Richard Lewis in China who can feed us information of what's really going on. The problem is when you don't have an in, and obviously we're not in the industry to Chinese CS:GO. From the outside, you can never really know what happened, right?
Yeah, I know. I have no fucking clue what happened in that whole situation. I will say it's kind of scary that all of the well, maybe not scary, but like with all the top teams fracturing at once, essentially, it does kind of worry you that a region that probably doesn't have a deep talent pool to begin with, all of a sudden just fractured their talent. Now you'd hope that one of these teams that forms is like the best of the best of all the teams, and I think that's what Flash Gaming is supposed to be technically. I think that's kind of the idea behind that one. I will say from what I saw from Bled tweeting and the things that, you know, when the China Cup was going on, he said that BNTET guy is supposed to be like incredible for the region, like one of the best players in the region. So I'll put some faith in that. But at the moment, I don't know. With all the roster changes, I don't think you can really take any. This is my issue with Tai Lu losing this. Is like, on one hand, it is good to see another team from the region being able to beat them finally, and hopefully that implies that, you know, other teams are getting better and improving. But at the same time, with all the roster changes that have gone on among, you know, both teams that played there, Tai Lu themselves, obviously, I don't know, and also Flash, I haven't even seen them play. I don't think it really means anything because it's just so soon after these roster changes that it could just be, you know, a one-off random thing. They probably weren't even playing with any kind of real semblance of teamwork even to a certain degree. So unfortunately, it doesn't really tell us anything, although it will be cool to see this team, you know, competing in Sydney. That'll be nice. They'll get some experience against the top tier. And at the moment, I think that kind of experience against some of the best teams in the world, that should be like at a premium for the Asian scene. Like that, you know, you're going to get stopped if you're an Asian team going to this event. You know, you're just going to go in there and just get beat the fuck up. But getting that experience and playing against the best is like the best way to improve. So in a way, they've already won to a certain degree. Right?
Yeah, and one point I will make, okay, is the main thing to me that actually holds the Asian scene back, aside from the obvious one that, you know, not enough people play Counter-Strike in Korea and China, etc., because of the problems we know with publishing over there, and the fact it's a very different world and it has to be free to play, you know. The main problem is, if there was enough people playing, more of the actual scene of like money would come into it. So like, for example, I know there's loads and loads of organizations in Dota and League of Legends that aren't in CSGO at the moment, and likewise in Korea, you know. And the problem is, even though it looks bad now, because on the surface it is, that you had two teams of good players and you've split them into four teams and you brought in a bunch of extra players that no one knows yet how good they're going to be. And so you could just have watered down all the talent there and be even worse. But one thing I'll say is, that's just a scenario where it's just the scale that makes it worse. It's the fact that at the moment not enough people play and there's not enough big orgs in the scene. Because if they ever get to the point where they have enough people play, so they have the player base to have good players, this system will actually be superior to anything Counter-Strike has ever seen in the West. And the reason I say that is because, okay, in Dota is one of the only games that, like, League of Legends and China had, essentially, Dota is one of the only games where in League of Legends and got it wrong around there.
Dota Are you high now, Duncan? Are you
China? So China is one of the only scenes where Dota and League of Legends are huge at the same time, right? That's the point I was going to make.
Okay.
So they do the same thing in both of those games, which is in their games, their approach is they have more than one team within an org at one time. And the reason you do that, this is the genius part, is because think about what all the NA teams are figuring out as a problem now in CSGO. The problem is, as soon as one of your players goes off the boil, you either have to let him go, which means if he's skedoodle, maybe he goes to another team and reinvents his whole career. So you're worried about that. And secondly, you can't get someone else because even if you want a selfless player, that's going to cost you. There's a buyout there. So the actual economics of the industry, fuck you when you're a top team, as bizarre as it sounds. So what they do in Chinese Dota and League of Legends is every org has more than one team. So that first of all, if someone's doing badly, you can sort of bench him to the other team and he can figure out if he's going to get his shit together again. So you don't have to sort of burn yourself on a star. You can test him out again still. Secondly, you can use the other team as a farm team and bring up those players to the main team when you think they're ready. And because they're in your org, they practice against each other. So you actually know if that guy's good, not just like, he played him once online in a qualifier or in a totally different team. So it gives you a really different approach to, first of all, like skipping buyouts and sort of growing your own talent and keeping talent within your org. So that's how they do it in China. In Korea, what they'll do is they'll actually, because they have so much talent in the games they play, they'll just straight up have two teams in as much as, like, they might have two teams that both compete in all the same leagues. And what they do instead is their big benefit from having two teams is actually just having a guaranteed scrim partner. So the idea there is, sure, you're never going to get as good practice when you play someone that you've played a million times because you kind of know their tendencies. But because they're in your team, you never get into the problem NA teams have, which is that even if Cloud9 and Team Liquid practiced against each other, if for whatever reason some of the Team Liquid players just decided to not play the scrim properly and just dick around, Cloud9 can only really say, please play properly. That's it. They can't make them, Whereas if you're in the same org, it's actually in your benefit to practice properly, like actually do the strat that they want or defend the right way. I actually feel like the point I'm making is it's not working at the moment because China's not at the scale where this could be like a game changer. But if they ever got really huge, like the West is not making any inroads to doing this. So I actually think this just shows how it would be a superior approach, to esports.
And by the way, I think that this is something all teams should have. And I mean, it's a little bit. Actually, it's not even that crazy considering all the money that some of these orgs have to have like a team like that, like a farm team, or Fnatic has Fnatic Academy. Obviously, you can't play against them all the time, but the benefit of that is you are improving them at an exponential level. If you just pick up 5 people who have a shit ton of skill, and then also, I mean, you look at the FaZe situation where Kiyoshima has this surgery coming up, right? And he's going to miss a game, and ESL will reschedule it. Now, take whatever you will from that. He told them a month in advance, and it's just not happening. But at the same time, this is a perfect situation where you say, play a 6th man, play someone from this team, like give them the experience, and then you have this footage of an actual match scenario, a professional match where you can tell them what to improve on, what to work on. You also, are in a situation where your manager or someone has to play, whatever it might be. I think there's a lot of benefits to being able to have a second roster or at least a 6th player to where it probably doesn't happen so much in the European division, but especially in NA, if someone's being a piece of shit on the team, bench him. Like, why? Like, how are we not benching people yet? Why do we hear so much about attitude problems? Just say, all right, dude, you're going to be a piece of shit. You're not going to show up on time. You're not going to learn your smokes. You're not playing for the next week. We'll bring in the other guy. He'll want to do the smokes. Yeah. So that'd be great. I mean, building on that as well, it's Monty that has the bet that a Korean or an Asian team would win a Counter-Strike major within 2 years.
What the fuck? Is that real?
Yeah, I think he made it with Sadakis at the PGL Asian minor last year.
Oh, the one in Korea, the one I was at. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So apparently they have that. I don't know what the stakes are. That'd be interesting to know.
That's a ridiculous bet. There's no way he's winning that one.
Right, but like you also know Monty. He's got the full faith in the Korean esports machine. I just don't think that it's accelerated to
here's the crazy thing, okay, right? His problem with that is he's hoping that Valve will see the potential that he sees in Korea, which is that if you ever get Korea to love a game, they can be the most popular country. Like, okay, here's a stat that people in CSGO won't know, okay? So League of Legends is one of the most played games in the entire world. It's one of the only games I know of where every major region is all in. Like, they're all playing it almost to the max amount, right?
Yeah.
And yet, Korea has more people who play the ranked mode of League of Legends than NA, the region. Now, Korea is a country of 50 million people, and they have more people play ranked than all of NA, and it is a fucking popular game in NA.
Yeah.
So that just shows how dedicated they become if they get into a game. So the problem with Monty's bet is that if the limitation that Valve essentially is placed by not publishing it correctly there was gone, if it was gone and tomorrow CSGO became like a top 3 game in Korea, I would actually take his side of the bet. I would say, given enough time, with their resources and the number of players they have, they would do it, right? I mean, admittedly, it sounds crazy, but it's sort of like a more extreme version of the Luminosity thing. So remember, if I'd have told you 3 years ago a Brazilian team will win 2 majors, that's a ridiculous thing to say. But knowing what we know now about how dedicated they are and how good some of their vets have been of sort of passing on that knowledge, well, Korea's like that times 1,000. So he's actually right. His problem is he doesn't realize that in 2 years from now they could still be at a not much higher level than they are now.
Yeah, if you make that bet at this point, you're kind of banking that at some point within like the next 6 months to a year, the scene like takes off, and then things kick in, and then it's like you have a year to kind of figure that out. So obviously. Yeah, I think he's going to lose that one also. But yeah, it's not a bad bet. I don't think if that Korean esports machine gets moving.
Plus, to be fair, I remember some guy, an actual fucking idiot, who made a bet when Astralis had just added the new in-game leader. He was like, don't win the major, even though they hadn't done anything. They hadn't even won a tournament at that point in time. And here's the thing, Moses. I've always told you, I've always taken your back on this. He was totally wrong to make that bet. It was one of the stupidest bets I've ever heard. And yet, he somehow, this is proof, Moses, of how it's not actually the result that shows that you're right. It's got to be the reason that you give, okay? That's what tells if you're right or not.
Yeah.
So the result tells us Anders Bloom was right. Astralis did win the major. The problem is, he couldn't have known that far back. And he had said that every major. He just happened to not put a bet on all the other ones, which is so sick, right?
The worst part is the next one. What was it? Not Vegas, Katowice. He said FaZe was going to win.
Did he really?
Yeah, he said FaZe was going to win. They made all the finals.
What? What a piece of shit. So wait a minute.
Wait
a minute. So when Astralis is the best, he doesn't even pick them. This guy's actually mentally ill, isn't he? He's got something fucking wrong with him.
You have to realize this is the entire plan of Anders Bloom. Every time he has to make a prediction, he does like the most insane one. He
goes with a crazy one, yeah.
Because he knows if he's wrong, no one's going to remember and no one's going to care that he did the bet. But if he gets it right, then everyone's like, oh my god, this guy fucking called it. He's a fucking genius. So, that's Anders in a nutshell for you. Trying to work the mental system.
What an asshole. You know the sick thing, by the way. Here's the saddest part I've realised about Katowice that none of us ever talk about because the order of the tournament is that SK and VP went out in the group stage, so they were just gone by the time we got to the playoffs anyway. In your own mind, you do just sort of reduce the tournament to whoever's left. You start thinking, who's got a chance here? Who could play who? What would happen if this team met in the semi-finals? You do forget about the teams that were eliminated. Yeah. So I have to say, the really sick thing about Katowice, I actually feel bad for ESL in this sense, is that they really could have had Astralis versus SK or VP as the final as a best of 5. Yeah. So that could have been like some of the most epic shit ever, but they did kind of get fucked on that one because there's not many teams can go, as you saw from FaZe. FaZe did a good job, but to play Astralis in a best of 5, you got to be a really solid team. You can't be like a new team.
There. That's too much for that new lineup, wasn't it? Yeah, they got that kind of sucks. That
would have been epic.
I've actually thought a decent amount about that format, and I think the format would be better if they split the group stages along 2 days. Like they did the same format, and you'd have Group A play the first half of the groups on Monday or the first day, and then the second half on the second day. So you can't just come in and have a shit day and just get knocked out. I think that'd be kind of interesting. It's not that big of a deal.
So the next big event we have is StarLadder, and I have to say this is an event where when you consider that only 10 of the let me see. No, only half the field was invited, right? So they invited, names you'd want: Astralis, FaZe, VP, SK, North, Na'Vi, and then the other teams is Gambit. I mean, Gambit is good, but obviously with it being a CIS event, they were going to get an invite. That went without saying. NIP's still fan favourites, but then the problem is that meant we had a bunch of teams that we needed to qualify to make the rest of the event look good. Now, obviously, by the way, 3 spots also go to China because of the fact that it's partnered with I-League, which is actually a Chinese league. That's why it's now StarSeries I-League. So I have to say, first of all, on the European side of things, it went pretty well. The European qualification was Fnatic, G2, and Hellraisers. Now, the Hellraisers one, the only one that's questionable, but Hellraisers beat Envious, so it's not like it was a joke, to get there. But obviously, the big deal is Fnatic and G2 get there, because we've seen Fnatic, and they do look like they're gradually getting there, but G2's finally going to be at a land. So I want to start there. This is going to be the first outing for G2. And obviously, there's a reason why this is called the French Super Team. I know a lot of people, because they lost their first online games, want to be well, they're not. They're just, they're overhyped, etc. Now we're going to see them at an actual LAN. What are your thoughts coming into this LAN for G2?
I'm actually not that excited to see them, to be honest. Well, I'm excited to see what they can do, but I don't think they're gonna. I still don't have the feeling that they're gonna do that great. I know Sponge thinks they're gonna get top 4. I still think this is a team with with a lot of issues. I'm not sure they've gotten over a lot of them. I know they've had an atrocious start to the online season, which take from that what you will. But I mean, I see a lot of the issues that when this team formed that I said we were going to see. They still persist. I still think there's this kind of I think they're still weak tactically. I still think they're going to rely a lot on star power on guys like Shox and Kenny. I think outside of that, they have these very defined role players that if the machine's not clicking, for instance, they have Kenny, who is the AWPer. They have Apex, who is like the entry fragger. And yeah, if either of them goes off in that role, they probably win the game. But the issue is that doesn't happen that frequently anymore. It's still a lot of reliance on guys like Shox and guys like Kenny. I think NBK is starting to play well. But outside of that, you have NBK, who's a role player. You have Body, who's a role player. So I still think there's a lot of problems in this team. I would just like to see some kind of positive growth. I'm not going into this expecting them to like blow everyone away. I'm not going into this and saying if they don't make top 4, like I'm done with them. I just want to see some of those issues start to kind of slip, right? Because when you have this level of a project of like rebuilding everything, their goal is the major. Their goal isn't winning StarSeries right now. It's to learn from this event and kind of develop the team for the major. So all I want to see is steps in the right direction. But I think they'll get top 8. I don't expect to see them like gunning for the semifinals and then going for a chance to play in the finals. I don't see that out of them right now.
See, I'm with Sponge on this one. I actually think that they
of course you are. You can't back out now, Duncan. You've got all in on these guys.
I'm not worried, mate. Here's the thing. I actually do think that first of all, I really love that their first event's a Swiss system tournament. By the way, I should mention that actually. There's no group stage, it's Swiss system. Because the good thing about Swiss system is there's less excuses. Because since you're constantly getting paired against other people with your record, even if they fuck up the seeds, which they didn't really do that much here, it was quite questionable, But even if, like at the majors, as they're going to keep doing, they keep fucking up the seeds, the whole point is, like, 2 matches in, that sort of evens out, At that point in time, you are playing people who are roughly the level of how you've played so far. So, first of all, that means if you're G2, every match does matter. So I think that's really good to get it. Like, we'll have a good sense after this Swiss system who G2 are. Like, for example, if they bomb out completely, there'll be way less excuses now than if you'd been in just a really tough group, and you'd just been edged out. So I'm really glad that we get to see them in Swiss system. And for me, I just think that the reason I'm not too concerned about the online performances, I actually see G2 in the kind of mode of VP, some of the past Na'Vi teams, where I think it's just the online form hasn't shown through, and for whatever reason, they haven't mentally engaged online. But I think offline, they are going to be not peak level, but I think they'll show the form that you'd expect when you look at these players. I think they'll be good. And I think also confidence offline will be really big, whereas online, I don't know why, but for some reason online, they have still wavered confidence-wise. They have looked like they even had like whining when they lost matches and stuff. I think the difference is people like them who are vets, when you go offline, you're like, right, this is my shit, who cares about online games? There isn't really a carryover like that if you're a vet player, I've found.
No. I mean, once you get to a certain point, that's the same issue with VP is they just like nothing really clicks in for them online. But I mean, here's the issue. That's all well and good for VP, who's been a team for 3 years now. For a new team like G2, if you're not like zoned in and focused online, like how can you expect to be prepared for the LAN tournaments? That's what worries me the most. Now, to be fair to G2, they have won their last 5 games online, so they're starting to look better. They're starting to kind of click things in. And as far as I remember, they qualified for this, and it was only really ESL Pro League where they looked significantly weak. I know I haven't watched everything online, but when you set up this roster, you need to be engaged in all the matches. You need to be focused. I'm sure practices are going fine. I think, was it these guys or Envy that had a boot camp? Or was it both of them?
I think G2 just did a boot camp.
Yeah. So that's good. Hopefully that went well. But like this is, if you're a team that like is the perennial, some of the legends of CSGO up to this point, and you haven't gotten out of groups or, you've been getting beat up at the previous majors, like this is where like it's kind of like, they've done everything right. When they hit rock bottom, they were like, all right, now we just kind of reshuffle and we get to work. They've said all the right things, but if you're not engaged online in the matches, then you're not actually like applying yourself. You're not applying what you're saying, and that's what worries me the most. Is that they have actually. It's not even disorganized. It's disinterested at points during this online season. So that's a little bit frightening to me.
Plus, a big problem I have with online play in Europe at the moment is that the parity in Europe, once you go to online only, is is ridiculous. Like, teams that are like 13th beat the team that's like 4th or something, Like, the problem is on LAN, there would be a massive, like, there would be a hierarchy of these teams can't beat these teams, won't ever beat, there would be a real strict hierarchy. The problem is, when you go online, I mean, the obvious example right now is, last time I checked the Pro League standings, like, fucking Mouse Squad without Nico was like 4th, and at the time they had the second highest point differential, in the round differential rather, in the whole league. So what that shows you is that when you go online and everyone has your 50 ping, whatever it might be, suddenly Kenny, at the moment, okay, the reason why I always say the AWP should be reverted, the nerf, is because there's barely any AWPer who's like a star player in the whole world at the moment. Like, you'd be hard pressed to make 10 AWPers at the moment, mate. Like, once you got to like 8 or 9, you'd be really scraping the barrel and picking, like, fucking, you might put people like Skadoodle back in there, That's what I mean. Like, there's really not that many names. So the problem here is, you go online, you go in Pro League, mate, people in Pro League who aren't even AWPers AWP in a random game where they're feeling it, and suddenly having Kenny S isn't that huge an advantage, You've got a guy who's like 10% better online than the others. Difference is, you go offline and you put Kenny S and Shocks offline now and play their specialty roles, they're monsters. So I'm really excited to see how G2 goes. I think, obviously, they're a long-term project anyway. They're not just going to change players if it doesn't work out the first 2 lands. But I think they can really hit the ground running. So, okay, going on, I want to get your take on the new NiP, because that's obviously a big name coming in, because people are so down on NiP from this last couple of tournaments. And people, I mean, I realized some of it was like memeing, where just because they lost to Vegas Squad and it was funny then to say that they were shit, What do you actually think of NiP with Draken? Like, what do you think they can do at a tournament where it's, let's face it, all the best teams are here pretty much?
I mean, we have to remember as well, it's NiP after a roster change, so automatically that kind of like gives you a little bit of a boost. For whatever reason, this team seems to really love that. It is nice seeing them, just because this is like, Draken is closer to Michael like the Michael spectrum. Remember how I always talk about like Michael as a playmaker, and when that whole thing between Michael and Pit, we all, like, a lot of people wanted Michael to stay. I was one of them. So I like that Draken is brought in. I think this is another team that's probably going to do quarterfinals. I think they look all right, but I mean, they don't look much different outside of the fact that they have an AWPer who's going to make some plays. And from watching what he's done online, he makes a lot of mistakes as well. So that's a little bit worrying. That's why I don't think they can get past quarterfinals. I think teams are like, he's going to make one critical mistake somewhere and it's going to get pounced upon by an opposing team. I've seen him make like 2 to 3 per match online, like critical mistakes. But he's no doubt got some skill. So that helps a lot. I think the big thing isn't even Draken coming in. I think it's the fact that GetRight's playing so well lately. After his, like you said, the meme game against Vegas Squad, where we got like 1 kill throughout the match or something like that.
It's 2, but yeah.
Yeah, he's zoned in. And I mean, I know a player like that comes into this new year and he's like, fuck that shit. He's like, I'm never performing like that again. So he seems refocused. He seems energized, and he's been playing excellent for NIP, which is a scary, scary prospect for his opponents. But I think they've just been passed up by too many teams to still consider them a real threat. I think FaZe has gone past them. I think North has gone past them. I think Gambit's probably gone past them. So they're going to be dangerous. And they're going to be good, but these teams, I don't think that they can beat like the teams in Pool 1. They'll be able to contend with Navi. I think Astralis, VP, and SK can all pretty much handle them. North, Gambit, FaZe can beat them. I think they should be able to beat G2 or Fnatic, I think. So I mean, it'll be interesting to see what level they're at. I think they get quarterfinals.
That's the problem. I don't think they're going to make it out of the Swiss system. Like, I don't think they will be terrible. I think the people went too hard on them those last few events. Like, I'll admit, the one that was worrying to me more than the major one was actually when they almost lost to Cloud9 and then did lose the first time to Cloud9 at Vegas, That was like a level lower than I ever expected to see NIP play at. But I thought they were okay in Katowice. I thought they weren't terrible. They were all right. And I do think that, like, this lineup will be okay. I think it's not a bad change necessarily. I just think that the key point you pointed out is too many people have gone past them now. Yeah. Like, it's no joke. I made a video about this. I think this could be the most competitive era CSGO has ever seen, like, to a crazy level. And so when you consider, like I said, this is an event with all the good teams there. Like, top 8 means not just like, oh, I did a good job in my group. It's like top 8 is, you got to be really legit right now. So this is where I'm worrying that NiP's just going to lose like that one close game. That means they don't get top 8.
Yeah, top 8. I'm actually looking at this a little bit deeper now, and top 8 is going to be tough for them, isn't it?
Well, the whole point is like it's kind of like what you said there. Okay, yeah, maybe they could beat one out of Fnatic and GT. They probably have to beat both. If you consider
and Immortals isn't even a joke at this point.
Yeah, because the problem is, especially with Swiss system, you're going to be playing those teams likely in the middle of the Swiss system. You're either going to lose your first few games and meet them there, or they're going to win. You know, like you're going to play those teams eventually for the spots. Remember, to get out of the group. So sure, if things go perfectly, maybe you could steal a map off North or something. These things could happen, but remember, you have to win 3 of these motherfuckers. So I don't know. I think Nip's going to be hard pressed to get out of the group here. Like, I'm not feeling that confident for them right now. And in fact, I have to say, going forwards, that's my big concern for them. They didn't make a big risky move that has the chance to propel them higher. If anything, they're just looking to get back to where they were like 6 months ago, which is like good, but now in an even more stacked scene. So I have to say, I don't see Nip winning tournaments for a long time.
Do you think this move helps them? You know, we mentioned teams have passed them by. Do you think this at least like keeps them in place now, where like more teams won't be passing them by, or teams won't stretch out too far ahead of them? Do you think they can like build on this one edition of Draken and kind of make a team that's going to be better than the previous version?
The big problem is I still think that, put it this way, if they were open to roster moves, then yeah, in the next 3 to 6 months, they could make one move that puts them back into like, listen, they're never going to be world champions, but let's say they could put them back up to the 5th to 6th. Say that's like a nice range you could get to, okay? Yeah. Where you have the odd chance to go deep in a tournament. The problem, I think, for Nip right now is they have just shown that these 4 players are not going to quit of their own accord and that they won't kick each other. And so as long as that's the case, I mean, and for me, you'd have to pretty much fucking get Olofmeister as the 5th player, or something like that, you know, to have any chance to really change your fortunes. So yeah, my problem is I think they could be like a solid team. I think it could be good. I think they're all veterans. They all know how to play. They've got amazing synergy from playing for so long. But the problem is, how do they ever go higher up? Especially when there's teams that, like, still don't know yet how Fnatic and G2 are going to pan out. Like, even if 1 or 2 of them bomb, if one of them's really good, now the scene's even more competitive. You know, like, it's so dangerous right now to do what Nip's doing, which is not make any crazy moves when everyone else is upgraded, as it were.
Do you draw, I mean, I'm trying to think if we can draw parallels to, like, VP's situation, right? Because VP is now, like, shown that, like, yeah, they were pretty much down and out for, like, a year. You know, most of last year, I'd say, like, what was it? Had to have been, like, 8 months of last year. They were just kind of, like, worthless. And now they're one of the best teams in the world again. So I'm wondering, why can Nip not do that? Like, why can Nip not,
well, to be fair, kind of Virtus.pro is the most ridiculous, like, exception of all time. In that sense. Like, no one else has ever done that, you know?
Yeah.
And then secondly, you have also got to consider, I think this is like a legit point. So the other one of, like, Virtus.pro is the only one who ever did, that's just like a correlation, essentially. They're the only ones who ever did do it. But in terms of why I think it works for Virtus.pro, I've thought it's worked because Virtus.pro to me defines like aggressive Counter-Strike, where what you do is, it's like if you play poker. If you play a really aggressive style but you're a good player, you get a benefit from the fact you're very aggressive, right? Other people sometimes fold because they think, I can't risk taking it at this point in time, right? So you don't always have to have a hand as a result. You can sort of maneuver even when you don't have. So that's like equivalent to not having as much skill. If you're very aggressive and you have players who commit to that, you don't have to have the most skill. You can make like a ballsy timing push. So the good thing for VP, in my opinion, is that the one thing that never left them is that if they got it correct, their style was always effective. Whereas to me, that's a problem for Nip. Like, I think part of the reason why Nip had to, like, abort everything and bring in Threat, and then, like, sort of when Threat couldn't have the impact because of the coaching rule, then they had to go back to sort of like a hybrid of their old style and the Threat style. For me, their problem is that their style of play hasn't worked for a few years. Like, listen, when I say hasn't worked, I mean to be like a top 4, top 2 team, you know.
Right.
It's been good, certainly. They have veteran players. They have still legendary players, but the problem is, you look at all the teams who we've got in the mix now, Astralis, VP, SK, then you look at the teams that are like flawed, but maybe could do it, North, Na'Vi, G2, Fnatic. These are teams that not only have the skill, but they all have like their own defined style. So it's like, how does the Nip style match up against those? Not favorably. That's my concern, is that for them as a team, you know. It's like I don't even see the best case scenarios being that great.
Yeah, it has to be. I mean, we've seen from NIP in the past, like the tournaments that they've won. Which were the events they won like late last year? Was Oakland, where Exist I think had a really good tournament, and the one before that,
StarSeries.
That was Freiburg had like a very good final.
And that was when they had Makalele.
Yeah, and it's always the role players in NIP that step up when they win events. That's what's kind of frightening to me. It is kind of like the three outside of Get Right and Forest. Like one of them has to have a good tournament, like a really good like tournament if they want to win. It's always that third person. So that'll be. I mean that just always seems like the success for NIP is that the recipe to a championship is when one of those three. It's just like you can never really count on it, can you?
And this might sound weird, right? But I want to bring this up because I think it's a relevant point now when we've got all these like super teams who in theory aren't going to have this issue. Is that if you look last year, a lot of NIP's like good to decent placings came when they got to beat Astralis before Astralis got Glaive, right? Because when Astralis were in their slump...
Yeah. Well, Oakland was like right when Astralis was about to peak.
They would constantly meet NIP, and the difference is NIP used to beat them, but we know they didn't beat them by just having like a more skilled team, blah, blah, blah. No, they beat them because Astralis like essentially imploded and NIP just applied the pressure to make them implode. So in a weird way, I feel like some of those Astralis wins kind of propped NIP up and made them think, hey, this is still fine, like Astralis is really skilled, we beat them, like, we can still do this with these teams. And the problem is, I think that was kind of like fool's gold. Like, I think the difference is if they lost all those games and had all the same placings they'd otherwise had, they'd have realised, like, okay, either we really do settle into the idea that this isn't a competitive team, it's a friends team, or they'd say, okay, it's a hard choice time. If we really want to be a top team, someone's got to go. So I feel like the difference is, you look at the scene now, there's not a lot of teams who are good, who are going to implode like Astralis did. Like, I mean, I look at this field here. Okay, maybe in their current form, someone like Fnatic, maybe the new GT, maybe they could do it right if it was the right series. The rest of the teams are just too solid, Like, for example, even teams that aren't that sick, like I still don't think FaZe is super sick at the moment, but they've had the one good performance. Okay, teams that have still got something to prove. FaZe, North still, those teams aren't really just going to crack like that. You could beat them if you outperform them, but it's not going to be like the Astralis situation where you had like a really weird like mind game matchup against someone and you always won out somehow. I don't see that happening with these teams. It can happen obviously with less experienced teams, but the scene in Europe right now is fucking nuts at the top.
It's nuts. It's nuts all the way through. I mean, it's insane to think that I feel like the top 10 has got to have 9 European teams in SK. Like it's ridiculous how deep the European scene goes and how close they all are. I mean, FaZe like getting to the finals is nice, but like VP Astralis, even SK right now, but like this European scene, especially once you get to the tier 2, that's I think the big thing between Europe and NA at the moment is I think that tier 2 teams in Europe are like on par or better than like the tier 1 in NA. I don't even think there's an NA team that you could put in tier 1. So I think everyone in Europe has collectively raised the bar and gotten better. And I think the NA teams at the moment have taken like a big step back. And actually, they haven't even started moving forward again because half of them don't even, or like 2/3 of the top 3 teams don't even have set rosters yet. So I mean, there's big issues over in NA, as if there wasn't already.
So an interesting team to talk about is actually Na'Vi, because even though on surface they haven't changed a player, they've still got the same lineup, but the key thing is, if they've really kicked StarX, which they have, and they did it on the basis that his coaching wasn't effective and the style didn't work, etc., then now is an interesting time to watch them, because you're not watching them doing the same old thing before, hoping eventually it somehow clicks, and works. In theory, if this new coach is different to StarX, that should translate to the team and we should see a different Na'Vi. So for me, if you notice, I've been fairly down on Na'Vi the last few months. Like, I actually think where they've been placing's about right. I think 5th to 8th is pretty solid, but you get them into a series against a good team, which is what happened every big tournament. I don't see them winning against an Astralis, that sort of level of team, in a best of 3, So the question for them now is, if they really have changed the style, maybe this is possible now.
No. Mm-hmm. I actually like what I've seen out of Na'Vi online. I think this so far this past like 2 weeks of them has looked pretty good. Where I've seen improvement, but I think they have 2 big critical flaws that prevent them from winning a tournament any time in the near future. And that is one, I think their map pool has abandoned them. I don't think they have a deep map pool whatsoever. I think especially like you look at a map like Mirage, what they've always historically liked, that's especially gone to shit. But the nice thing to see is Guardian has been slowly regaining his form. He's looking very, very deadly at the moment. I still want to see Simple do some of the vintage Simple stuff. I feel like he's too confined, which was a worry going into a Na'Vi team that's so used to having that really like the machine, the system that everyone kind of falls into, that the process that they've always gone through with when Starks was behind him. I still think he's a little bit chained up there. But also I think there's CT sides. I think this team is really, really lacking in leadership. I think, obviously C's being a new in-game leader, there's going to be some of those struggles. But I think he's fallen into, and maybe it's not his fault, maybe it's a collective team fault, but I think there's like the trap, right, of the end game leader. When you think about the end game leader, he's the guy that calls like the strategies, the tactics, and the first thing that you always think about when you think of end game leader calling strats is someone calling on the T side, on the offense, of how you portray yourself across the map and how you attack the opposing team and where you move. But that also applies to the CT side. There's got to be some leadership on the CT side, and at the moment, most of their CT sides just look confused. I think the rotations are piss poor. I think because of that lack of confidence, you can see players sometimes get lost in where they're moving and how they're moving across the map. And I think that really neuters their individual skill and their skill level to be able to actually hold and defend bomb sites. I think they have a big trouble retaking bomb sites outside of crazy individual efforts. And because of that, you're just not going to beat any of the other tier 1 teams. This is a team I think that in this event specifically can go from like top 4 to not even getting out of the Swiss system, depending on who they play and how they play that day, and that kind of disparity in what you can do really, really scares me. And it's not like a VP one, because VP can do the same thing, but the difference is VP just has bad days where they just die. Navi, I think they are that wide in their performances because they have massive flaws in how they're operating at the moment, and they're not playing well as a team. So Navi, I think, is, while they're looking better, I still think there's 2 big critical flaws holding it back, and it's just kind of hit or miss if those are going to display themselves on that day.
The big concern I have with this move is, okay, I actually made an article which I published the day that Starks was cut, because obviously I was saving it, but when he was cut, I have to basically publish it. And the premise was, what can Na'Vi do? And I went through all the options, bring Zeus back, not likely, maybe get Angel. And then one of them was try a different coach, because to change the start. Now, my concern with that is, when I say try a different coach, obviously I'm anticipating the sort of coach that I would want to see. So, for example, when I look at the Na'Vi lineup, the first thing I would do is, logically, I look at it and I say, right, we tried to play in a system, a very structured system, for solid 6 months, no more than that, it was something like 9 months or something. So we've given it a good run, right? That's not worked for us. So the obvious move you can do if you want to stay with the system is you've got to change your player. So at this point, you might have to change your player anyway. So it's kind of the last run of this lineup. So personally, the first thing I would do, and this is what I would want from an RV coach, is let's just turn people loose. Let's turn all these talented players loose, and let's see who's going to stay, essentially. And then we'll figure out who isn't working out, and then we'll try and replace what we need at that point in time. We'll try and get a player that can, whatever it might be, follow this guy up, anchor this site on this particular map, whatever it is, we'll get the player later. So I would do that. Now, the real reason why I'm bringing this up is, unfortunately, I don't think that that's what this new coach will do. Because I have to say, a very strange trend I've noticed is if you ever talk to any of the coaches within the CIS scene, they actually don't ever take that sort of Western, very loose approach to the game as their model. They always go with a very structured system. They always have almost a methodical approach to breaking the game down of you have to do this against this type of opponent, and you have to play this type of map control, or you have to attack in this particular way. Yeah. And they go the other way. They really want a lot of structure, and to them it's just how do I get this player to fit into my structure? So I can't imagine this Andy guy, who we don't really know, is coming in and he's going to go, right, I'm just going to play a really loose style. I'm going to turn you all loose. I'm going to have simple and flamage going off. And so, unfortunately, I don't think he's going to have much success. He might be able to tweak some things to make, maybe Starks had a disconnect with some of the players. That could help. But I personally don't see him being the guy to unlock all this potential in Na'Vi. So I'm kind of with you on that. I don't think they're going to do much.
Well, this is an interview that Guardian gave to HLTV. I think this actually came out today. We are using Andy as our coach. He used to be our analyst for 2 years, if I'm right. He initiated this himself. He said that he wants to become coach, and he knows where the problem comes from. I will say that since that announcement, since Andy's taken over after Stark stepped down, I'm assuming it was pretty much seamless in when it ended and began. I think their T sides have looked good. I think they've looked better. They've looked a little bit more like there's a sense of what's happening. Now that could be a combination of Andy's input and also C's getting a little bit better at in-game leading and being organized and feeling comfortable as a leader. But like I said, it's their CT sides that are going to be the issue. No matter how good their T sides are at the moment, their CT sides to me are just atrocious. They're giving up a lot of space. They're giving up way too much ground to opponents. They're not willing to challenge for that ground unless it's Guardian with an AWP. And I think they're just giving up far, far too much and playing too passive and unconfident. So at the moment, it just worries me. I mean, their Mirage I don't think is good. From what I've seen of their Inferno, it's not good. Nuke is obviously atrocious. These guys just don't have a great map pool. And it'd be one thing if they had like 3 maps that you could feel confident that they can contend with the best in the world, right? But they don't even have that. They obviously don't play cash. I don't think their overpass is that impressive. So all of a sudden, these guys, I feel like, are on the back foot pretty much everywhere they go, and that's a big issue.
Although I will say that's where they're a little lucky that this is a fucking Swiss system tournament. So at least you get to ban out half the maps. That gives you a lifeline at least.
Here's the thing with all these teams. I think we've gotten to the point now where we're not going to see roster changes between majors. I think the majority of times, unless there's like some kind of massive problem, I think all these teams are always saying, if there's a problem, we give it to the next major. We're gonna play the next 3 months. We're gonna have till the major. After the major, we'll decide everything. All these teams are just kind of focusing on that one goal, which is good to see. But they have so many problems to fix in such a short period of time. I don't think this tournament is going to be great for them. Maybe they make it out of group. I don't see them going past top 8. I would even be worried of them getting out of group to a certain degree, depending on how they start. I think if this team starts slow in the Swiss system, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. I don't see them as having the mentality of being able to come back from like being down, 1-2 or either 0-2 even. So it's a little bit worrying.
Okay. All right, what do you think about? Okay, what is your sense for how Virtus.pro will do at this tournament? Because since, as we mentioned, all the good teams are here. It's not automatic that everyone gets out of Swiss system, and last time we saw them was just that performance at Katowice. What do you think of Virtus.pro coming in?
It's Virtus.pro. Fucking hell. This seems always so hard to read. The nice thing is they're going up against MVP Project. I think they'll have a little bit of an easier game to get started with. So they can struggle a little bit in that first game if they have to and still kind of make it through. They haven't been impressive online, but then again, they never have. They've always just been atrocious online. I mean, definitely they make it out of group. I can't see them not making it out of group in 2 tournaments in a row. That would be a nightmare, I think. I still think this team, it's like we always say with Virtus.pro, I don't think anything's changed. This is a team that can come in and just win this event and stomp everyone out, and it's a team that can come in and get knocked out in groups like we saw in Katowice. So I think VP is like that one unchanging rock in the scene. I think they have a very strong map pool. I think they have they have one of the best players, if not the best player in the world, in Snacks. And then they have like Pasha still playing very, very well. Haven't seen too much of a dip from him. He's still going well. So it's the same kind of team that we saw at the major and then at Vegas and then also at Katowice. We just don't know which one's going to show up.
Yeah, and one of the keys to me in this tournament is, like, I actually think the fact that they were able to beat SK on Inferno, and as a result, they must be playing Inferno, is really good for this team, because in the Swiss system, this is why I think VP is a lock, in my opinion, to get through to the playoffs, is that if you look, okay, and they're going to play potentially, like, you obviously can play at most 5 games, unless you just get through already. Right, that means for them not to get through in this system, there have to be enough teams who can either play their really strong maps or can vaguely ban them out. That's the problem, right? So at the moment, nobody in the world wants to play VP on Nuke or Train, and you can probably even add Cobble in there, right? So, okay, some teams might be willing to play them on Cobble, but who the fuck wants to play them on Nuke and Train? Now, the problem with that is, most teams don't automatically ban those maps. And in a Swiss system, if you ban out Train and Nuke when you play VP, you now can't ban out weaker maps of yours. So you might have to play them on Mirage, and you might not be good on Mirage, but they might be pretty good. See, it's actually going to be tough to navigate again. Like, for me, Astralis and VP are both super locks to make it out of the group stage, in my opinion, because like the map pool alone means if they play it smart, it's tough to know what you do for your opponent. I can't even give the opponent advice. Like, do you ban their best maps, or do you just try and only get to maps that you're both good on? Like, it's tough to even give someone advice because it's kind of like it's bad either way,
Yeah, I know. That's the tough part. It depends on how, obviously, like, if you never play a map, you obviously kind of have to ban it. But like, yeah, at a certain point, I think it is better to take a risk on maps that you're not as good on versus playing them on their strongest map, right? I'd rather get them into a situation where they're at least vaguely, even if it's just the most minuscule amount, uncomfortable with a map. But I mean, still, it's kind of like, how much hope do you actually have in that scenario? Yeah, I mean, they definitely should make it out. It's just, listen, Duncan, Katowice, it's shaken me. That's a nightmare. I don't know if I'll recover from.
Yeah. No, but here's the thing. I will give VP a little bit of credit in this match. Like, even though I said the 3 maps that they lost were some of their strongest maps, and like, you shouldn't be losing to teams like that. The one thing I'll say for them is Heroic was always the wild card there, because like I said, they bizarrely have played Nuke a lot the last like 9 months or so, and so they were always one where it's like they had a chance if you gave them one of their 3 maps to upset you, and unfortunately VP did exactly that. I mean, admittedly it was VP's unbeatable.
Yeah,
they were like 13 maps
or something. Yeah.
So yeah, I'll give them credit in that sense, but as a result, I think that's also an exception. I don't think that's going to happen at this tournament. Like, the difference is if you get one of the lower seeded teams, even a Fnatic or someone, it's going to be tough for them if they have to play you on something like Nuke, like one of your stronger maps, or Train. It's going to be real tough against Virtus.pro, so I think they're pretty solid. Okay, how about this? Since this is a pretty competitive event, go through your top 8. Who's going to get out of the Swiss system? So start out at the top. Who are the locks?
All right, I'm doing Astralis, VP, and SK are getting out.
Are they locks?
I'll make them locks.
Okay, those 3. So we've got 5 spots left. We've got a lot of teams here.
I know, this is getting nervous. Okay. I'm going to take North, FaZe, and Gambit as my next 3.
Okay. So we've got 2 spots left.
Fucking hell, Duncan.
And by the way, for the spots, we've got...
I know.
G2, Fnatic, Immortals. Who else? NiP. We've only got 2. You've only got 2 spots. I'll give you 4 names right there. That's before I mention no one else, because they're all shit. No, who else? Who's going to get in out of those 4?
G2, Fnatic, NiP, Immortals. I'll take... Oh, bloody hell. I'll take Fnatic on this.
Okay.
Do I trust in the NiP magic? Do I trust in it? Yeah, fuck it. I'll take NIP.
Okay. So you're taking NIP over Immortals and who else was it? And G2.
It's a fucking statement, Duncan. It's a fuck you statement.
Okay.
I'm not even playing for the teams. I'm playing to fuck you.
Okay, because I'm going with quite a different lineup here, actually. It also just shows how competitive the event is. So, like, my locks, I will take Astralis and VP. And let me think, do I have anyone else as a lock? I actually think they're the only locks. I'll be outright with you. Like, here's the thing. No, I've got to take SK as well. Because the problem I have with the SK one is... Here's the factor about SK that I think makes them a lock to get out. Even when they lose, they always have like 2 players who just go fucking off in the game. Because that's the crazy thing about having Fur at the moment. And then and Thop's actually obviously developing, is that their consistency of firepower is fucking bonkers at the moment. Yep. So that's why I actually have a decent amount of faith in them in the long term to be good. Because if you're a good in-game leader like Fallen, and you have at least 2 players going off every game, okay, you might not have the formula tweaked right at the moment, but you just keep tweaking. It's not like Na'Vi where it's like, I've got all these stars and they don't go off. What the fuck is the formula to get them got? It's the other way around. You're just trying to put the pieces around these players going off. And you know when you do that, then you've got a top team. So give them the Swiss system. Yeah, I think they get out. So I have those ones the same as you. Then here's the thing. So did you take Na'Vi?
No.
No. Right. So I actually think the next group of teams is FaZe and North, because each of them, I think, are solid enough teams and both have firepower that I think logically they both should be able to get out. So at the moment, I think I have 5 teams there, so I have 3 to go. Now, this is where I'm going to deviate a lot, because for the last 3 teams, I'm actually going to take Na'Vi, because I actually think, it's bizarre, I actually think they're a perfect example of a team who are in their own purgatory, where they've got enough talent that, like, here's the thing, when we say they misfire, it's not like they never turn up and as a result they go out in group stages. The reason they don't go out in group stages is because actually they have enough talent that they somehow do win enough games to get out of groups. It's just they can't win a series. It's not consistent. So I still think over 5 potential games, they will eke it out and they will get out of the group. Then for my last 2 spots, I'm actually going to say... I've told you already. I think G2, so I'll take them right now. I think they've got the talent. I think the roles. I think they're just going to hit the ground running, basically on LAN in the way they didn't online. So I've got one spot left, and here's where it gets crazy, right?
You're gonna take Immortals, aren't you?
No, that's my problem. Is that my last spot has to be between Gambit, Fnatic, Immortals, and Nip, basically, right? Like I've said, I don't really buy Nip at the moment, and so really it's between Gambit, Fnatic, and Immortals. And the problem is, I know people think I'm a hater on Gambit because I just don't really believe in it. But I don't think anyone's going to give them Cobblestone at this tournament. So I think they're a decent team, but I think give them 5 games, they're the sort of team actually I think Swiss System's going to fuck over a little bit. So I think actually that Gambit's not going to get out. So it's between Fnatic and Immortals. And even though at Katowice I picked Immortals, correctly so by the way, but even though at that tournament, Moses, even though Moses, I did get that one, I'm actually this time going to go with the Fnatic end of it. I think now Fnatic has gradually been powering up, and I think this is the tournament where they get out. So I'm actually going to go against Immortals in this one. I still think they're a solid team, and if anything, by the way I went down that lineup there shows why Nip's in trouble. Because actually I have to consider like Gambit and Immortals before Nip at the moment. And that was already when I had 7 players out there. 7 teams, rather. So the scene right now is crazy. That's why this event's going to be so much fun, because there's a few teams out there that I feel like this event's going to tell you a lot about. So let's go through some of them, okay? So we've already gone through G2. Like, we haven't seen them, so that's why we want to see them. But okay, another team that we have to talk about, because this is the event that really solidifies where they're going to be, is FaZe. Because everyone wants to jump on the hype train of like, oh, they got to the final, and that was like 3 days practice with Nico, and he looked so amazing. But what do you actually think of them, based on what might happen at this tournament? What's kind of the sense for you coming in for FaZe?
Cautiously optimistic, a little bit worried perhaps. I'm really worried that this is going to turn into something where they cage up Nico a little bit, where they kind of like reduce his options and make him play a little bit more restrained, which they couldn't do like just by default in Katowice, because like you said, there was only what 3 days. Like they were coming into the venue like early on finals day so that they could just go over the different maps and be like, just a reminder, this is what we do on this map, this is what we do on this map, this is where you'll be on this strat. These are the things that we're going to be doing. So by default, you just kind of say, this is where we're putting you, and we just have to trust that you're going to make, the right decision with the minimal experience you have with us. And now that they've had time, I am a little bit worried that he's going to... Because we saw it in Mouse Sports, right? We saw it in Mouse Sports where he was, as the in-game leader, he's trying to play too much around what he's calling and too much to kind of play for his teammates and everything like that. I want him to just be unleashed. And he should be able to do that in this team because they have Alu playing very, very well at the moment. They have Kiyoshima is also playing very good, and they have Rain. So they have the players around him that should be able to alleviate some of the pressure, at least create gaps to where he can make his plays. I'm just worried that he will feel the need to kind of fit into that he'll try and be that puzzle piece, right? So that scares me a little bit. I still think they're going to be good. I still think they're dangerous. I think with the amount of skill they have and the players they have going off at the moment, I wouldn't normally consider their map pool that deep, but just because of how good some of these players are, that automatically just makes them dangerous on every map. So maybe they're not that good on the maps, but the fact that they just have so much skill just overwhelms that. So they have some advantages in that sense. This team, it's just kind of like they've only had Katowice, right? So this is just kind of to see what have they done with this time? What is this new phase? What are we going to start to see out of them? What kind of looks are they going to give us?
Yeah, I'm definitely with you in as much as like I think priority number one is you have to let Nico be the Nico that we remember from Mouse and we remember from Katowice now with FaZe. Because that's one of the few things that you can have in FaZe that you never had before, which is you could actually have the best player in the world. If Nico plays at that level, surrounded by a cast of good players, he could be everyone's consideration for best player in the world, Yeah. So at that point in time, you've got like a really good advantage over the other teams. Because when you play against Astralis, they're all from the same country. They've all played together. Well, a bunch of them have played together a long time. When you play against VP, same story. So the problem is you've got to find your edges somewhere, when you go to a match. So having the best player in the server, that's a great edge to have. I mean, Fnatic showed us that with the 2015 lineup, Yep. But beyond that, that's where I'm concerned. Because with the other players, I think all those players are good in their roles. Like, I think they're all solid to good. But my big concern elsewhere is I feel like I don't know that anyone else in the rest of the team is going to be like a second star. I think they're just going to kind of take turns. It depends how the game goes. So to me, the other big consideration is I put a lot of the weight on Carrigan's shoulders. Like he has to come up with he has to basically play the in-game leader role beautifully. If he can do that, if he can like scout the right maps to play, and then he comes up with the right game plan, and let Nico be Nico, now maybe they can be this dangerous team that, can be top 4 a bunch of events, and maybe they can even win an event. Sure, it's possible, but I'm kind of with you in as much as it's like I'm optimistic, but it's very cautious. Like, I don't want to say that they'll be like a world beater and that they can actually, like, I don't think they can be number 1, put it that way. I think that's probably out of their reach. But I feel like, to me, FaZe already was in the less stacked era, was like a top 5, top 6 level team. The difference is now they're still probably there at the moment, but they're just more dangerous. So that's what I really want from FaZe in the short term is just go into like a round of 8 matchup, and no matter who you're playing, be really dangerous. That's where they could. That's the trajectory, I think.
I don't think they will ever be the number 1 team in the world, but I think they have the potential to be the number 1 team at an individual tournament, right? When everything goes their way, when everyone's playing well, and it's kind of like the strats are going well, Kerrigan's calling sick games, they have the maps. They can be the number 1 team at individual events from time to time, but I don't think they'll ever get to that point where they're like consistently like the number 1 team in the world over months.
Because if you think about it, I mean, what I've essentially done there is take the 2 positions where they have a person who could potentially be the best in the world, which is Nico as the star player, and we know Carrigan's a fantastic in-game leader. So if those 2, I mean, it's a different type of star. That's actually a point to bring up. I'll ask you thoughts on this. So that's one area where why I'm cautiously optimistic about FaZe is that it's very unique as a team, in as much as a lot of the top teams at the moment aren't some amazing in-game leader. That's also another aspect about this era that's become very interesting, is that like suddenly people like MSL have the talent. People like Fallen, they have the talent to potentially be the number 1 team. And a lot of times in the past, the person who's the good in-game leader, the reason why we recognize how good they are is it's like MSL with his old lineup. So it's like, well, we know you must be an amazing in-game leader because you're taking a lot of players that actually aren't that good, like Tensky, and obviously you're having to play with a Norwegian guy. Like you've got a config hasn't developed. So at that point, if you can win matches, we know you're doing something amazing with these guys because they haven't developed skill-wise. What do you actually think in terms of like the current in-game leader setup in the game?
I think, I mean,
like, it feels like the first era to me where a lot of the top teams could really have like also the best in-game leaders.
I think there's a lot of good in-game leaders, but I think a lot of it has been, I think a lot of the tactics have been like kind of dumbed down in the sense that I don't think we're seeing anything necessarily like revolutionary outside of a couple different styles to execute, which is natural. But I think what in-game leaders have gotten good at now is just good mid-round reads on what plays to make, of where the pressure is coming from, and how to adjust to it. I don't necessarily think I think more in-game leaders have gotten good at coming out of defaults, right? Because they're finding ways. It's no longer enough to just be an in-game leader who is not as good of a fragger. And I mean, truthfully, in order to do that as an in-game leader, I think you just have to focus more on yourself. And so, I mean, I think a lot of in-game leaders have gotten to a point where they've kind of called easier tactics to start out with, or something a little bit quicker that takes the pressure of thinking off of them until the mid-round. And then from the mid-round, they kind of take over. But I think teams have gotten better at kind of playing in their smaller groups, where maybe there's like the in-game leader calls like a default or something, and there's like a 2-man squad on the other side of the map doing their own thing, like calls like, hey, you guys go do your B take, and then I don't have to think about you for like 20 seconds while you do this. For instance, like even with the Straws, we give a lot of praise to Glaive for his in-game leading, but one of the things that they do, I'm sure other teams do this to a certain extent, but I mean, Device will tell you, I mean, he's the kind of opper who at the start of a round is like, I want to go here. This is what I can exploit this round. The way this guy's playing, I can exploit this, or I can get this shot off, or I can get into this position. And then everything is kind of called around where Device wants to go on the T sides, right? And he just switches it up so much. So it's not Glaive saying, Device, go here. It's the star player saying, I know I can win this fight, and then kind of everything else going around that. So, I mean, it's just one more player that Glaive doesn't necessarily have to think about for the first 20 to 30 seconds of a round.
Okay. So another team where I feel like this is a really like make or break type moment is actually North, because the problem they've had is all their results. I mean, admittedly, they only had AZ for a couple of tournaments now, but all their results have kind of been like, okay, not bad, but not quite fantastic. Especially the one where they lost to Immortals. Like, yeah, true, it was an exception. Like, Henny has very rarely ever played like that. So it was still close. But if you're North, based on what happened with your top four at Vegas, you're supposed to be top four at that event. You're supposed to play FaZe. And in fact, because that was FaZe with a brand new player, you were supposed to have a shot to get to the final there. You really should have had a shot to play Astralis. And you messed it up and you went out in the first round of Katowice. So I feel like this event now has to be a big performance from North. Otherwise, they're going to settle into that position of like, well-rounded team, good players, could upset, but probably won't ever win these events.
Yeah, and unfortunately, if you even extend that back to last year, it's a similar story. Like think of when they won Epicenter and then did nothing, and we kind of all. I mean, at the time, you write that off towards the fact that they played 7 of 8 tournaments in 2.5 months or so to end the year, and you say, well, they're just doing too much. Like obviously, you just can't compete at a high level if you're traveling that much across the world. And now, I mean, obviously with 2020 vision, this starts to look a little bit more like a dangerous trend. This team has it is crazy to think they have all the tools, right? Like they have the star players. They have a star player in AZ who also made the decision to be a little bit more of a role player. He's not trying to take up ground away from Magisk and Config. They still have everything they want. There's no real explanation for it, I don't think. They honest to God, they seem like a Astralis / TSM of what, 2015, where they have all the skills. There's no real explanation to why they're playing bad. I still think tactically MSL is a very good in-game leader. I still think he has this team playing smartly. It's just they just don't win. That they're missing something that allows them to win, and that's kind of the frightening prospect because there's no good answer on what to do. Because all their players are well. I honestly think at this point it does come down. I think AZ needs to make a decision. I think he almost needs to become a little bit more of an impactful player. I think he has got too much skill to kind of be playing this role, playing for other people. I want to see that AZ back that almost carried Dignitas through a group stage in Cluj.
Yeah, the problem I have with this is why I say for me it's make or break. Like to them, it's just another event. They think, oh, let's do what we can. But this is really going to set kind of how I think about them as a team because the AZ move, every time you make a roster move, obviously there's potential you could get better. So that's what I think will be decided at this event. Like if they just manage to make it out of so I have them getting out of groups. Okay, let's say they make it to top 8. But then they just lose there because, if you think about how they're likely to get out, let's say they have to play a VP or something in the first round. If they lose there and they just finish 5th to 8th, they really will kind of just solidify in my mind as it's unlikely this team's going to be winning tournaments this year, And I actually think part of their problem is they actually feel a little bit like Na'Vi in as much as every time you look at the roster, you're like, this should be a fucking sick team. But I actually think their problem in North is that none of the star players ever consistently carries. They have the kind of team where it's it goes game to game who's going to be really good. So that sounds great, but that's actually not that good. There's a reason why most of the top teams in the world have consistent players that are, this is the star and we know he's a star for a reason. That's how we built the team around him. So as good as Magic's can be, him and Config, they seem to almost take turns as to who goes off in a game, So I will say they've got one factor that a lot of the other teams don't have going for them, which is their stars are still fucking young, mate. I think their stars are 19 each or something. So I'll give them a little bit of time in that sense, but it's got to happen soon if you're going to do something with this lineup.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing as well. I think to a certain degree, I think North started to become readable, in terms of what they were going to do. I always use a Mirage for this team. There's always a good example of what I think because Mirage got to the point where every time I watched Mirage, Magisk was going to be aggressive on that A ramp, and MSL was going to be aggressive in B halls. And if you're a team and you're scouting this squad, you're noticing these tendencies. And I think that's the big thing with young players who are new to becoming stars is all of a sudden when you see your skill level, when you feel your skill level jump so much, you're just I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing because I'm insane right now. So I'm just keep playing this way, doing the same thing, and then it kind of stops working, and you don't really know why, and it gets frustrating. And I think it's just a sense of you need to be a little bit more well-rounded in your individual game. So I think that's the next step for them. Hopefully that alleviates the problems, but I mean it is going to be. It's going to be a trying period for North because I'm with you at the moment. It's I know this team's going to be good. I know they're dangerous. I know they can win. It just doesn't feel like they will ever, right?
Yeah, and then the other team, I mean, I touched on them a little bit, is I think it's Fnatic. Because I even though I gave them a bit of breathing room compared to everyone else, because I know what these players are capable of, I said, okay, a couple of tournaments still at Vegas. Like, it's going to take them a couple more before we can really see if they can be, potential world number ones. I think this is where, like, this is the last chance. Okay, it's got to start to happen now. Otherwise, what's going to change? Like 4 tournaments in. So, what do you think of Fnatic for this one?
I have them getting out of groups, but I don't think we're going to see that change. I don't think this Fnatic's ever going to get back to what it used to be. I think at the moment, I mean, we've always talked about this team as like individual based, and they don't have the tactics, they don't have the structure, they don't have the team. They have the teamwork, but they don't have they don't have what all the other teams have. All their victories were usually inexplainable by like these individual Herculean efforts, and I think we're seeing consistently now what happens when the players as individuals, take a step back. Like they just don't have it anymore. That's kind of what it feels like at the moment. Olaf Meister isn't a dominant. We knew he bailed them out of a couple tough spots in different tournaments last year. So yeah, this team to me, I hate to say it, and if there's any team that's going to prove me wrong and make me look like an idiot, it's going to be Fnatic. But I just don't see it. I think JW is still in that period where his kind of play style with the AWP still kind of wreaks a little bit of havoc, and it still like throws confusion out there, but it's not as impactful as in terms of like he's not getting as many kills doing it, right? Like it's a little bit disconcerting to play against, but he's not like that dominant JW. That was always a big factor, and with Olaf Meister not at that level, you're just kind of seeing like guys like JW and Crims especially, it's just kind of like they have too many games where their play style doesn't have a big enough impact, and I think that's kind of the reality of this team.
Yeah, the thing was, that was actually one of the things that Katowice that was promising to me. It wasn't just that they were close to getting out. I thought it was that like the Olaf Meister looked better than he has. He seems like he's gradually coming together this year. He's putting his game back together because he was obviously terrible towards the end of last year. Yep. He's gradually getting his game better. The big thing about this team is the players they brought back in, JW and Flusher, just haven't clicked yet. That's still not there. Like I still think that. It'll sound strange, but I think that them breaking up this very lineup when they did it last year after E-League was such a bad move because even though I agree it was going to be hard to win because obviously you had SK still at the time, you had Virtus.pro, these fantastic teams, they actually had a little bit of the Virtus.pro within them, which is that all the players team played off each other so well. Like they kind of knew how to play, so they could get through crazy games where it's not all working, I actually think when they look back now, I think they almost didn't give that enough time. Like, sure, they hadn't won an event in a while. They were players who were used to winning, so they were like had demands of like we've got to do something. But like the one that I always think is really overrated is when they were at ESL One Cologne, they would have been in that final. It's just that Simple went absolutely mental over the series. Like they would have beaten Team Liquid and they would have been in that final, or they would have beaten Na'Vi if they'd played. Because remember, it would have been Na'Vi if Liquid hadn't beaten Na'Vi. So if not for Simple having like that mad tournament, they would have just played in the final against SK. Now, yes, I think SK would have beaten them. I think that actually they kind of fucked SK in terms of they didn't give them that one chance to beat the Fnatic lineup that they'd always wanted to. That should have been like the passing of the torch to the SK time. But I think the point I'm making is Fnatic. Essentially, they were like VP in as much as their players had played together for so long on the court. They were still very good, and they still had a lot of skill. The problem I have now is like now they've got that core back together, but they haven't played together that much still, and the skill of the players isn't as good as it was back then. So what advantages do you have,
Yeah, they did see. I mean, that was kind of like the crazy thing is it's almost like the amount of success they had actually turned into their downfall just because...
It warped them. It made them think like it's like the old thing I told you that I said to JW when he wanted to go to NIP when Fnatic was really successful. I said, mate, you forget that a bad tournament for you is the semi-finals. There are players out there who are as good or better than you now who make semi-finals, like once every 6 months.
Yeah.
The point is, like you can't take that for granted.
You can't even, and then you look at the landscape right now with how many good teams there are, and it's just like, holy fuck, semifinals is actually very difficult to achieve.
That's no joke. You can't cruise to a semis now.
Yeah. So I mean, this is, I think they'll look back on that departure, and I wonder if it's like, I mean, I think most of it is just like lost step in terms of, I think their play style, that play style they were successful with throughout 2014 and 2015. I don't think it necessarily just like works anymore. I think you do need to be a little bit more tactical, and they have what Jumpy is their coach, and I don't know him very well, but from what I've been told, it does have a little bit more tactical mind. And I've always wondered, if you're not going to listen to Pronax in like the era where he is like strongest in terms of his individual, his calling and everything, like who are you going to listen to? So I'm always kind of curious if they're actually going to try and like make this step back into being a tactical team. If they're going to try and find some kind of middle ground, if they'll listen to their coach or analyst who's saying, no, you guys need to be doing this, this, and this. I'm trying to think. We've seen a little bit of it online. We've seen a little bit more kind of like execute style, like just the tiniest bit. So maybe they're trying to kind of take that step towards the middle. But still, I'm not at the point where I think they're going to be challenging for any tournament wins before the major. And even at the major, I doubt it.
This is the concern I have with them as a team, though, is that I agree they need to put in some structure. Now, listen, you don't have to go the other direction. Obviously, we just need some structure. But the problem is, logically, the way you do that is one of the first things you do is you identify who are you going to play around, who is going to get the resources, who is going to get his spots every time, who is going to get to have autonomy, and who plays the structured role to allow that guy to. And that's where I feel like Fnatic hasn't figured it out, because their problem was the era I'm describing, early 2016, was where everyone's level was so good that they essentially could sidestep that whole conversation and go, instead of figuring out who the stars are and how we're going to play, we can all do whatever we want. And they can almost have the arrogance of like, and look, it works. The problem now, and actually probably the reason they broke up, is that when they don't have the success they want, now someone might say, well, okay, let me do this, or I want to do this, or we should do this. But before, they were like the team where it's like, hey, we have no leaders, man. It's like, well, now you probably need a leader. You probably need some more structure, So if they can, if I don't know what combo it'd have to be, because it's still tough to figure out, but if they can set themselves on that course, that's, I think, what takes them to being a good team again.
Here's a question for you, Duncan, just because I know you've kind of used this, you've asked me this question. I mean, it's more of a hypothetical or just a theoretical, but you've asked me this question about Freiburg. It's, if Freiburg was to leave NIP today, who picks him up tomorrow? And I asked the same question about like Crims in his current state, or in JW, because I think you'd have to go down to like a low tier 2 to tier 3 team to get someone to pick him up right now in their current forms.
Yeah, here's the problem with that. Okay, so those two players, right? In terms of Crims, right? I'll give credit to Crims in this sense, right? I don't think they ever will remove him, because he has such a great mentality in general of like, he'll do whatever it takes. He like plays very smart, etc. People in general will give him a lot of like leeway, as it were, to have some bad form or whatever, because essentially they know in a team full of egos, he's probably one of the few players who isn't like that. So I agree. It'd be like, he's not going to go to NIP. It's hard to see where he would go. But to me, it's JW should be the most scared of that question, because if you kick him out tomorrow, right, at this point, wouldn't it really pick him up? I don't really know about that. Like, I mean, he's not really like got the form to warrant it anymore. Would he go to Godsend? I think Godsend have seen the end of him. I don't know if they bring him. Maybe Pronix is so forgiving he'd bring him back. I don't know. But here's the thing. I think JW would only survive in current today's form. This is not if he ever gets his skill back. Obviously he was once a very dynamic player. Yeah. But in his current form, he would literally only get a team, I think, on the basis of his name. So maybe he could get into like Mouse Sports. That could happen, or Hellraise. Okay. Maybe he could go play in a team like this, right, where you speak English, you have a big enough name, and you're just like a decent pro. But I agree, no one would be fighting over JW tomorrow if he gets kicked out. So I actually think at the moment, someone like him, if they haven't kicked you out now, okay, maybe you just have a great rapport with people. You've got to get your shit together, because you probably should be kicked out if you keep playing like this.
Right. Yeah, I know, and I'm not saying he should be or he will be or anything. It's just kind of struck me. I'm just like, where would he go? Like, I'm not sure there's a team that would really like be leaping for joy at that. So that'd be a very interesting scenario. Why don't Duncan? Why don't you like Gambit? What's up with Gambit and you?
I mean, I've made this point before, but I think it's pretty legit. The problem for Gambit is they came along at just the wrong time, which is that if you put this Gambit team, if you could travel back in time, because remember, that whole like parity or uncertainty era where different teams won all the events actually happened just around the time when Zeus was kicked from Na'Vi. Like, it was basically like almost right around that time.
Yeah.
So if you could actually have put this Gambit together back then and sent them to all the tournaments, I'd say they could be like quietly good. Like, they could have a bunch of semis. Maybe they could have like an amazing tournament and make a finals run. Then they could really like be what everyone hopes they can be, this potential, right? My problem is when I look at this incredibly stacked landscape now, I can't see how they can be an elite team. Like, I see them as a team that could, I had them in the mix it. They could make out of Swiss system. They could make the first round. My problem is I actually see them as a team where it's like, I don't see them winning best of 3 series, because when you look at all the other teams, okay, in terms of skill, I think they're just decent. I don't think they can go against a lot. If start listing off the teams that have the most skill, there's a lot of them outstrip Gambit. Then you start listing off all the teams who have like amazing map pools. You can get lots of teams before you get to Gambit. You know, all they're basically living off at the moment is they're a great hybrid of newer skilled players and veterans. Now, that's great to have a team where they're exactly at right now. You know, like bottom half of the top 10, couple of good maps are pretty solid. But my problem is I can't see what could push them higher, you know. Like, I actually don't... This will sound strange. I don't think they're a great upset team. Like, I think they were if you put them on a cobble. I don't know why teams kept playing them on that. And maybe now teams just had to learn their lesson, you know. My problem is you put them in a whole series... Like, okay, I'll spin it the other way, okay? I'll do a classic Thorin, spin the question back onto you, and then if you can't answer it, you're the asshole. I'm pulling the Thorin, as they call it. So here's the question, Moses. Look at the teams at this tournament here, right?
Yep.
Remember all the teams you had in your top 8?
Yep.
So you had Gambit as well. So the other 7 teams you had in the tournament, tell me which of those 7 Gambit could beat in a best of 3.
Fnatic and IP.
And... Oh yeah, I forgot you had an IP. Okay, so you've actually set me up the whole way. Okay, well done, Moses. You win this one. The old long con. I wondered where you go with that.
So for yours, I think they can beat Fnatic. I think they can beat G2. I think they could beat Navi, and I think they could beat North.
See, this is what's interesting, because obviously we're hoping like maybe they get to play some of these and then people can listen back on this. So this is where like that team beating Navi in a best of 3, I think Navi outskills them too much, you know. And then in terms of North has a deep map.
I think Gambit's T side rips them a new asshole.
I don't know about that, mate. Maybe on one map, but winning a best of 3 though, that's tough, mate. 2 out of 3.
Yeah, but like Navi has some pretty fucking shit maps they have to play in that best of 3. I mean, obviously it's going to depend on the veto, but like, yeah, they'll never get. I mean, here's the thing: Gambit won't even get Cobble, and I still think they'd beat him in a best of 3.
And then also there's a secondary factor, which is as much as they're great on Cobble, sure, if you play that, so if they play teams that were willing to play them on Cobble, that gives them a shot. My big problem as well is if you have a map as good as Cobble, you want to be like. Heroic is with Overpass. You want to have a couple of other maps that are pretty solid and then have like a solid map pool overall. My problem with Gambit is they still haven't gotten over what apparently is in Zeus's brain, which is the idea that like, okay, maybe we can play Nuke and Cash, but they're not really ever going to be in our equation. So there's 2 of the 7 maps out. So now, actually, I think this is what's interesting. You remember they beat Fnatic on Inferno at Vegas.
Yep.
So that's a big question mark, okay? If they can get good on Inferno, now they've got a map pool. But if Inferno proves not to be a good map, like for example, in this tournament we might see them play it, it might be in the middle of people's map pools. That's my problem, is I don't think they have a deep enough map pool either. So you've got to have some advantage. You've got to have a map pool, or you've got to have skill, or you've got to have you've got to have veteran experience. The problem is there's so many good teams that I feel like add everyone else up and they don't have enough edges for me.
Yeah, I think I like I said, I have so much lack of confidence in Navi's CT sides that I think Gambit would just absolutely destroy them. I think they would just delete them off the map when they got onto a T side. I think Zeus would just outplay the shit out of them. Even in that's the thing. I think they just have to have like sufficient CT sides. That's all I would really take to beat Navi. I think the biggest stretch of those what I said 4 teams I think that they would beat. I think the biggest stretch of all those is North. I think North could challenge them because I think North's issues to a certain degree almost seem to stem from like confidence and being able to beat some of those top teams. I don't think they would have any confidence issues against Gambit. But I do think this team and here's the scary part. Dren as one of their stars, like he's exceeding expectations, and I don't think he's going to be able to get much better. By the way, he's playing incredible lately, or he did at the major. So, does it really matter? But Hobbit is so young; he's just going to continue to get better. So that's where it starts to become. If he keeps developing into this star player, a lot of danger there. So this Gambit, I think this is going to be a fun tournament to watch him. And I think they're one of the more fun and exciting and like compelling teams to watch we have in the pro scene at the moment.
And then if you remember, the one other thing I'll mention about them as a team is I still think that kind of rule I have holds with Mo, which is that it's the world edit rule. It's like if you put him at a team lower than him, he will look amazing. He'll look like a star AWPer. But unfortunately, for some reason, when you put these guys against like the top 6-7 teams in the world, they just play like average to bad. They just and that's the problem. If you have like a guy with that, you want him to be his best in those games, because that's your chance to win. And so, unfortunately, he's just kind of like let me down way too many times there. Where I feel like he's the X factor in a bad way, if you know what I mean. Like I feel like unfortunately he's not going to turn up. And so, in terms of the firepower, that's where I see some flaws. I also think eventually, I don't know when it is. I think at some point in the future, what needs to happen is they need to make some sort of hybrid of the players in Flipside and Gambit. Because, for example, in Flipside, a player who's been playing really great recently, who everyone knew was a talent, was the player Electronic. But the problem is, he's stuck on Flipside, who are like, okay, decent team, but they're never going to be tier 1. Let's be real. It's Flipside. Yeah. So if someone like him goes into a team like Gambit, which is a structure, good in-game leader, now a lot can happen. But at the moment, I feel like Gambit's still like a player away from being like the dangerous team that you want them to be.
Yeah, no, I think they're yeah, they have either a player or.
And one other thing, Moses, the other way, it can go the other way. So Flipside's coming up. The other way is, if Na'Vi ever do make a player change, put that player on fucking Gambit. That's the other way they can improve. Yeah. So I will say, here's the positive for Gambit. I'm not giving them a bright future right now. I think they're just like bottom of the top 10 team. But I'll say this: almost any other roster move or shake up in their scene, the CIS region, should only make them better.
When you did your article on the things that Na'Vi could do to improve, I don't remember. I read it. I don't remember if you had this in it. Okay. And I'm sure even if you don't have it in it, you probably thought about it. What would you say to Blade from Flipside?
I did have that in, but unfortunately, this is the point I referenced, is that I did an interview with Senya from Na'Vi.
Yeah, I remember that.
Basically, he told me that what I'd already heard, unfortunately, a lot of the times in the end of 1.6, which is that people in the CIS scene don't really think of Blade as like a top-tier leader. They think they say he's like existence, and he's like outmoded and all that sort of thing. And also, if you look, he plays such a structured style that you just saw what happened to StarX. The problem with the structured style is, if it doesn't work in any way, especially if it doesn't work for a star player, those guys will. It's like if you're a manager. It's like if you're a coach in an American sports team, right? The star player is the one who gets you fired. If the system doesn't work for the star player, he just gets the owner to fire you. Basically, he's like, you want me to stay here, don't you? Yes. I can't play with this guy as my coach. You've got to get someone in who fits me,
Yeah.
So in the same way, unfortunately, that's why it feels like they don't even consider Blade. Like, if I were them, I'd give it a shot, You got all this talent. Like, it's like the whole thing we said when Carrigan joined FaZe. It's like, the concept is, the pieces are there, you just need the person who can put them together. At the moment, in their team, Na'Vi's an even more extreme version. They really are like, the parts of a Ferrari are laid out. My example for the Carrigan one was he's in a junkyard, and he's got to make a Ferrari. This is like, the parts of the Ferrari are sat. And that famous thing.
You just have to bolt everything together.
The famous thing for people who have like OCD, where you put like a Sharpie pen really close to the lid, but it's slightly off, and it's like, it'll break them. It's like Chinese water torture. They have to put the Sharpie pen into the lid. That's like what Na'Vi is. It's not only the parts of a Ferrari, Moses. They're not even spread around. They're like, the engine is almost hooked up to the carburetor. That's all I know about cars.
We'll bring Seneca Sim for the second.
We're just going to patch in Seneca Sim. Matt, what parts of a car are there? So anyway, the point is, they're all really close. It's just that no one has as yet gotten this particular set of parts to go together. Yeah. So if I'm them, the point I'm making is, really your only options are, here's a shortlist of people who potentially could do it. Let's go through the shortlist until we get the guy who can do it.
Yeah, I see. That's the thing. I don't know if I do Blade. Because I think it goes.
You got to change that statement right there. I don't know about that. What you're on about? He's a well-respected older member of the Ukrainian scene. He's a good provider.
I don't believe that I would tap Blade to be.
Moses, I'm pretty sure Blade is a guy who brings home the bacon, He's not going to be there. He's never going to have a top management job like you'd be pushing him to have, But he's going to bring home the bread. He's going to work a solid job, 9 to 5. He's going to come home with his lunch pail. You'll have a wig on. You'll make him some sandwiches, some borscht or something, He'd make a good woman out of you. That's all I'm saying. You could listen, Moses. Stop being picky. You couldn't do that much better than Blade. Stop overrating him. He's a good man. Okay.
Oh fucking hell! I wouldn't bring Blade in as an in-game leader or a coach for that matter.
Or have sex with that matter. Let's just put that out there.
Just put it out. It wasn't the question at all, but I'll just add it on again. I think the time of I don't think Simple is a star who could be in his system. I don't think that's in him. At this point, they've tried it. The only times we think of the teams where we've seen him be actually insane in the majors was the 2 Team Liquid versions, and both of them they knew he was going to be off the roster at the end of the event, so it was all right, fuck it, we'll just let him do whatever he's going to do, and we'll just do everything else as a team on the other side of the map. And then at Columbus with Team Liquid, he was such a pain in the ass that no one wanted to deal with him, so they just let him do whatever the fuck he wanted, and those were the best. Those were literally the best we've seen Simple. Yeah. Now, to be fair, one of the other good times we saw Simple was on flip side when they upset Navi at ESWC. So maybe Blade has some tricks up his sleeve, but I think that was just so long ago as well.
And plus, unfortunately, if you remember the atmosphere when he left, the implication there was that they almost had to let Simple do all the shit he wanted to do there because he was just being such an asshole that he kind of just took over the team. So actually, I feel kind of bad for them in as much as he probably short-circuited a lot of this shit. No, I have to say, of all the options that were out there, the easiest is get a different coach, because that way you don't have to change a player. And obviously, the problem they have right now is every player on paper either has such tenure or such a big name or such skill potential that it's like kicking Skidoo out of Cloud9. You're worried that if you do it, it ends up gifting the enemy a weapon, right? So my problem is, I actually look at their team, and the one that I would plump with personally out of all the options I gave was the one that actually, I can't remember who you saw. You're the one who told me on this show, actually, but I can't remember where you saw it, but the idea that maybe they could just try Angel from Hell.
That was Blah, I think.
Ah, okay. Well, that's actually, I think, not a bad shout, because he's a fragger. He already plays in-game leader, so it's not like he's making C's do the role. Yeah. I don't think that's a bad shot. So I still think that that's one where, I don't know if it's possible. Maybe the politics mean it can't. But I would give it a shot. I'd give it a go,
The eternal question isn't who to bring out. It's who leaves.
I mean, I've already told you this many times on the show, and I'm still sticking with it because I still think it's the case. I would kick Guardian out of Na'Vi. I realise, listen, to a lot of people, that sounds like blasphemy. And I have to say, I'll make a point right here on the show, okay, because we're going to refer to this when we're talking about kicking people a lot in the future. To some people, it sounds crazy to say something like, I would kick Get Right out of NIP. I would kick Guardian out of Na'Vi, because even if these players aren't playing well now, part of you wants to say, listen, they've earned their spot in that team, they at some point in time they hard carried, and so now that they're the one underperforming, they get kicked. I get that, right? And on one level, I agree with fans. On some level, they should be able to write their own ticket as to how it ends. They should be able to stay as long as they want, play however they want, because they did earn it by hard carrying. The problem is, when I think as an analyst like this, I'm thinking about how do I make this team better than it is now. Yeah. So that means I can't think legacy-wise, because when people do get to write their own ending in sports, they would, for example, Dirk Nowitzki on the Mavericks now, right? He's still a good player, but he's nowhere near a top 5, top 10 player in the NBA. So the problem is, if you have him on your team and you say you can just play here for the rest of your career, you get diminishing returns, You will never again win a championship. So if you're willing to accept that, fine. My point I'm making here is I'm always thinking, how do I get this team closer to the world number 1 status? So that's why I have to say kick Guardian. I agree, legendary player, but right now I don't see it from him. So I'd rather have him go and bring in someone else. And I also think, as a side point, this isn't how I'm making my judgment, I think as a side point, he's got a lot of fucking soft landing spots he could go to. He could go to Mouse. He could go to NA. He could go to fucking the Dignitas team or whatever. There's plenty of places this guy could probably go, and he would be still a name quality and people would want to play with him. So I think for Na'Vi, You've given him enough time, Come on, it's not turning around for this guy, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would. Well, it has. He's looked better online. And in fact, I think he just had I can't think back for a month. I know this past week he was excellent. So I think this is kind of that thing where it'll be kind of solves itself at LAN to see how he's going to be playing, how good he's going to be. Yeah, there's probably that. I mean, not to mention, I feel like for the past year, we've heard rumors that he was going to leave. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, Guardian's going to leave. Probably at least 3 or 4. So yeah, oh well. That was a nice little tangent after Gambit. Did well there, Duncan.
Actually, that reminds me, I mentioned them there. So I've got one last topic to end the show with, which is I forgot actually the new Dignitas lineup had formed.
Oh yeah.
So this is the one where Rubino is apparently just really loves the Dignitas jersey. So he said he said, Odie, please can I be in Dignitas again?
Can I be a little yellow alien?
And they said you have to play with Fox. And he said, I'll even do it in that scenario. And they said, okay, but I didn't mention you also have to play with Makaleli. He said, I heard that guy's like a rage or something. He goes, yeah, but I also didn't mention Jkaem's on the team. Didn't he get 3 kills at a StarSeries match? Yeah, but you do get to play, who was the last member of the team? With Peter. And he goes, Odie, I just love this team too much. So he joined anyway. So my point is, the lineup is, it's Makaleli and Jkaem were the ones making the team, and then Fox obviously played with those guys in G2. Rubino was previously in North, but he's Norwegian, so he's got the Jkaem connection there. And then the 5th player is actually Peter, the old NIP coach, CLG coach, and then way before that he did play in Lemon Dogs early on in CSGO. Right? What do you actually think of this team? What do you think of it, Moses? How do your thoughts? I did a video on it myself, but what are your thoughts on the team?
This is not even a poor man's phase. It feels like this is I don't even know, a dead man's phase.
Fuck hell, all right. Yeah, how's how you feel? Okay.
What's below poor? What is the I don't know what to put there. I don't think what do you want from me on this one, Duncan? How is this team put together? I feel like this took so long to come through that this was not the original lineup. They've had to make concessions. It's just taken so long, and people that were originally supposed to be part of it went elsewhere. That it's you have to drop down to the next player that's available. But for instance, when Peter left CLG at the end of E-League Season 1, he told me that he was going to be playing again soon. Now, I don't know which roster that was part of. I'm assuming maybe that was the Maniac team that got put together a long time back.
Okay. Could be.
But I mean, how is this team formed? I'm assuming Rubino just really, really wanted to play with another Norwegian, perhaps. Wanted to stay home, got on a team where he didn't have to travel so much or live in a gaming house. But I don't see this team doing well. I think Michael Laley, is it's unfortunate that the reputation he's gotten from not having stayed in NIP twice now. But I think he's got some skills. I think he's a good player. And I think, unfortunately, due to circumstances, he's not going to find a better team. He's just going to keep having to do this, make his own and bring it up and see where it goes. Jkaem, we haven't seen him at a star level since Cluj. So, this is just a team of players. Rubino, we know he's just going to be a role player. I just don't see the skill level. As good as this team is in tactics and teamwork and then whatever it might be and how smart they play, I don't think there's enough skill on this roster to be able to contend even with tier 2 teams, to be honest with you.
Because basically, my main thought on this team is, I don't think it's as terrible as people make out. I actually think it's not a bad mix. It's just that when you look at this lineup, to me, the entire team's future is all about Jkaem. If Jkaem somehow with this composition is good, then they can be a potential upset team. They can maybe start to look towards getting in the top 10. My problem is if they don't, he's the only obvious candidate to be a star. Makaleli's good, but we know he's up and down. Rubino's good, but he's mainly shined in less star-orientated roles. So that's not a bad little core if Jkaem was the star. Because we already know Peter's going to be the in-game leader and Fox is going to be the supportive player. But I kind of agree in a sense, because right now, obviously, they don't have the firepower. But I actually think if those 3 are good, then it's not as ridiculous as they like. But it's obviously a work in progress. I don't expect them to hit the ground running, put it that way.
Those are the big ifs. And I think the tough part about this is and I'm going to come to your side of the table for once, and this is going to be a little bit of hell for me. This is against all my better judgment.
Come on.
But the only time we've seen Fox play at a level where he can like be like a high impact player is when he is on this SK for the major, when he is surrounded by some of the best players in the world. And that's not to say he's a bad player. It's just he is not a player that can create like his own impact, right? He's got to be part of a team. He's got to be like the cog in a machine. And where players like Cold and Fur are like their own little mini machines. I don't see him on this team that doesn't have that kind of an organization. To be able to find ways to have that level of an impact. Because if I can remember correctly, the only other time I saw Fox play at the level that he did at the major was one game in Cluj-Napoca. It was against Envy on Inferno.
I think it was Inferno, right?
Yeah, where we went into like double overtime because he had like 40-some kills with the AWP. It was insane. But outside of like that, like he's just not the kind of player that's going to be able to carry on his own right. He's going to need those players around him. So yeah, that makes the importance on Jkaem. That makes the importance on Makelele, who I'm assuming is going to be. Which one of them is going to be the upper? Do we know?
I think they implied Makelele is the main AWPer.
Okay. So yeah, that's even Fox now. I mean, even SK Fallen gave him op spots. So this is going to be very intriguing to see how this all comes together. I imagine the tough part is that I don't think we're gonna like see this team for a long time, just because they're an ECS automatically, actually, aren't they? Because the team has the spot. So okay, so I'm wrong. That'll be nice. We'll get to see where it comes, but that's gonna be a really tough test. I don't think we'll see them at the finals. And then outside of that, I mean, we're not going to see these guys at events. This is going to be like a really tough road for them. It's not like what it was when Makelele created the last team that became FaZe, right? Yeah. Like they kind of had success and got invited based off clout, but now you have so many good teams that are going to automatically get invited to events that these guys are going to have to qualify, and I think they're really going to struggle with that.
One thing I will say also is an interesting X factor for the team is that we know Dignitas has money and that Dignitas is actually one of the bigger orgs. Even though they lost their lineup to North, we know they had that cash injection where which team was it that partnered with them?
76ers.
76ers, that right? Philadelphia 76ers, right. So we know they have money. Now, a key detail to add in there is this is a straight up international team. This team is going to be speaking English all the time. Yeah. So as a result, this is one of the things, I said that like Mouse should basically just try and become a second phase because they're always going to have English players. So for example, they recruited, they obviously have Oscar, and then you saw Penta's actually trying to be like a secondary phase as well. They've got like Sonny from Finland and stuff. I think Dignitas, they can actually take over and become the real second phase. Like they're probably not going to spend as much as FaZe does because that's how FaZe gets those players. They just spend a god tier amount.
That's unreal.
But the difference is, if there's a good international talent who isn't fitting into a great scene, if I'm this Dignitas lineup, that's what I do. I do upgrade, I get that player, and they've got to be one of the first choices as a destination for those players. So I feel like this is a lineup that, much like the old Kingwin G2 when they had a lot of money, they could get in that way. They could backdoor by just actually getting good players. Which, by the way, just as a point, to everyone who is a fan of the original team, and then the team just picks up good players and becomes good, and then goes, ha, see, you analysts said that they weren't good. Yeah, well, we didn't say that they were not good when they had bad players, but then when they got good players, we say that they are good now. Yeah, you win, fan. You fucking owned me there. Like, if anything, you've just shown scientifically why you are a cunt. I think we'll just end on that one. I'm just going to stop it.